Okay.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay. You're so funny.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone to our December Committee of the Whole and go ahead and call it to order. And the first item on our agenda is the minutes from the November the 14th Committee of the Whole. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve and a second. Is there any discussion or amendments or editorials? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion carries. The next item on our agenda is the appearance of visitors. We have no visitors this morning, so we're going to move into our instruction portion, and that is the Continuous School Improvement Plan. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Good morning. This morning, Mr. McCoy, Dr. Mitchell Hofer, Dr. McDonald, and Mr. Reimer are going to present to you a package of continuous school improvement plans. This is something that is new to you all, and it is new to us. Now, not the fact that we have improvement plans for instructional delivery at schools. We have had those for TSI schools, for CSI schools, for schools that we deem in need of focused instructional improvement. This, however, uniquely, because it has not happened years past, is tied to the report card ratings of schools. So a school with an below average or unsatisfactory report card can find itself being required to have a continuous improvement plan. Now, one of the issues with this is there are certain deadlines around those plans, and Mr. McCoy will share those specifics with you, but in short, one, you don't know who's in that status till the report cards are issued. And you can remember report cards come out sort of mid-October. Well, we have from mid-October till January the 24th, thank you, Jeff, to develop a plan for every one of those schools that fall in that status. Jeff's going to share with you the timeline for that and the inclusion of all the groups and individuals that have to be included in developing the plan. The final approval, before it goes to the state for approval, unlike any of the plans we've previously done or had to submit, requires the board to approve that plan. In order to make certain that we do that in an appropriate, timely manner, we're presenting that to you as soon as we could get it ready, which is today, or leading up till today. It is on your agenda to approve tonight if you choose to do so. If you believe you need additional time to look at it, because it's pretty lengthy, we can defer that approval to a special call meeting following the Committee of the Whole or preceding the Committee of the Whole in January, which still gives us time to make any adjustments before it's required to be submitted to the State Department, that then has to go to the State Board of Education for approval. Now, Jeff and his staff have been in communication constantly throughout the process with the State Department of Education. We do not anticipate any alterations, changes, or rejection of any of the plans based on that communication that has been ongoing. When you look through those plans, and they'll give you a summary this morning, there's an appendix attached in your board docs that goes into great detail. But when you start reading through those, as I'm sure many of you have, if not all of you, in preparation for this morning, you will see things that are very familiar to you. Strategies that we have used successfully, software that we have used successfully. Everything you see in there is research-based, and there are strategies and technology that we have experienced success with in improving instruction and improving student attainment throughout the system. But we have to put all that together in a package in a certain format to provide it to the state. So Mr. McCoy is going to give you a little more in-depth overview than I gave you. And each of those assistant superintendents who leads and supervises schools that fall within this requirement will present to you the summary of each of those schools' plan. Mr. McCoy?
Thank you, Dr. Royster. Some of this information will look familiar because we did briefly discuss this in the workshop. Workshop for those of you who were here. We talked about the report card designations. We talked about some of the processes the schools were going to have to go through as well. So we are going to review those just because I know it's been a little while and it was a lot of information. So just as a reminder, underperforming schools, again, we went over this in our workshop. It is a school based on the statute there that you can see is defined in the statute, a school that receives an overall rating of unsatisfactory or below average on its annual school report card. So unlike a lot of other accountability measures we have in place, this one is identified annually. So hopefully with as we're working with these schools will come off of that next October when it's reported, but really it's all done by May. By May, all the test scores are complete, finished by students and all the metrics that go on those report cards. So this is an annual process, not a 3-year process like a lot of the other accountability measures are. So the schools are identified every year. They come on the list, they come off the list based on solely unsatisfactory and below average ratings. As you may remember, those are based on the report card metrics. It varies by elementary and middle versus high school. Academic achievement, progress towards learning. High school does not have the progress indicator because they don't have a test that is consecutive. They don't have an Algebra 1 test and an Algebra 2 test to show growth. They only have the 4 EOCs. So how this calculated is different. There's a survey on there that counts ML population, that counts a certain portion. So this is the whole sum of the report card. As far as that rating goes. So any school, we have 7 this year that fell into either below average or unsatisfactory. And so those are the schools that we are talking about today, and the assistant superintendents are going to talk about in more detail. I will say all of these schools have the ability to move, the ones that particularly are below average certainly have the ability to move out of this category altogether back into average, good, or excellent. You can jump 5 ratings in 1 year. You all remember a couple years ago when Heritage did that. They went from unsatisfactory to excellent in 1 year. So it's very possible based on how much the students grow to do that. And same with unsatisfactory Carolina and Berea. We expect at least them to move another level, if not more levels, out of that unsatisfactory range into below average, but again, hopefully into that average, good, or excellent range to get off this list. So this is a review again. These are our turnaround plans that have to be done. You'll notice up there an effective date. This is a new process, as Dr. Royster mentioned already, new to us. It put in effect July 1 of 2022. However, you will recall that year you may recall, we got our report card ratings very late. There was delays in the State Department. Part of that was transition. There was transition from old administration to new administration. There were some glitches in the data. And so there was very late getting our data. I don't think we got it almost until Christmas or January, some point in that time frame. And there were still errors being identified even up until February. This process has to kick off in October and really November. So last year in communication with the State Department said there's no plans this year. We won't be doing plans this year because the data came in too late for school districts to do anything. Also remember what I said earlier, the data for this year, we've been already in this year for how many months, however many months this is, 5 months, whatever it is, already. This kind of ends in May. The students take the tests in May, so all that data is already done in May. So you're really looking at only a few months that these plans will be in place for before kids take those tests and the new data is beginning to be calculated. The State Department takes that data June to October to calculate the new report card ratings. So plans are required to be a part of the school's strategic plan. And this is very similar for those of you who spent time in Title I, know about the needs assessments and all that you have to do with Title I plan. So this is very much based on federal money that we have to do with through Dr. Brink's office. You can see, again, you'll see in the plans, they have to be measurable goals, activities, strategies, anything that's necessary, to improve the overall school. Again, heavily in elementary and middle, the report cards are based on test scores. Growth of students, how much your students grow, where they achieve. At the high school level, it's based on certainly achievement of EOC scores, but also on grad rate. Grad rate carries a big weighting at the high school level. And then you can see also that community input. It has to include broad community input, and you can see some of the groups there. All of our schools, I'll talk about in a minute, had to put these committees together to help put these plans together. And then we have to submit to the district superintendent and ultimately you to get this approved. Again, this is not required in previous years. This is new as of July 1, 22. So we have not done this before. This is a new process for us. And then just a couple other requirements from the state. You can see, again, Dr. Royster mentioned this as well. The turnaround plan has to be part of the strategic plan. And then annually, we have to submit updates to the department. As far as the strategies, we also have to submit progress monitoring, how the schools are doing. Now, again, remember what I said earlier. Again, May is the new data, so there's not a lot of time between, these approved and then May the kids take the test. So there's not a lot of time for updates because the data will be in, and some of these, hopefully all these schools will be off this list next year, and we won't have any more fall in. And then once approved by the department, the State Department of Education, we do have an obligation. We have to post it on, the state has to post it on their website, we have to post it on our district website, and then the schools have to post it prominently on their website. Again, very similar to what we have to do with Title I plans in a Title I school. And then also, you can see here, we've worked with, this is a superintendents have worked with, academics has worked with the schools that they built these plans. And then they do have to inform the parents and the students of the ratings as well. Most of that's already been done as per the process as well. And then all plans, we want to point out this out too, because you probably saw it on the plan. The template you have is from the State Department. We did not come up with that template. That's the template they sent us to use for the turnaround plans. We were required to use that. You will see that goal 1 on all the plans had to be a resource and equity goal. That was the one requirement from the State Department, that one goal. It didn't have to be necessarily goal 1, but one of the goals had to be an equity resource goal, which means basically what gaps or what resources maybe students don't have that may be leading to those learning gaps. And those resources could be also things like high quality teachers, it could be physical resources, it could be any number of those things as well. High quality instruction, Tier 1 instruction. Do kids all have access to the same high quality standards-based instruction? But it has to be a resource and equity goal. So you'll hear those are going to be very similar across the 7 plans, just because that's what we kind of focus on, is that inequity of high quality instruction, making sure all students have the highest quality instruction in the classroom as possible. This is just a review, so I'll just hit these very quickly for you. This is what our schools have done. In the workshop data, that was something that you saw as we were going to do. Now we have done this. But this is for below average schools. The process varies slightly for below average versus unsatisfactory schools. So for below average schools, they had to convene the 5 that are in that category. They had to convene school and community stakeholders, and that's really where they had to work on the plan that you have. They had to brainstorm strategies, they had to brainstorm goals. What do we need to do to move the school forward? That's what that process included. Most would include SICs, those types of folks, PTAs on that plan. You can see again the turnaround plan component of the strategic plan. These plans you have in front of you will go into the strategic plan once they're approved by the State Department, ultimately, well, you and then the State Department. And again, you can see what they have to be. They have to be based on needs assessment. They have to include the community's input as well. And you can see again who those people are. The school boards, of course, is this process here for you guys. And then submit the plan to the superintendent for approval. So you can see those steps have all been done. Everything up until this point has now been done by the schools to stay on the deadline the state gave us. You probably don't remember this date. The date originally was January 15th. The state put out there, they realized that was more a weekend, and so they moved it to the 24th. So that's why you've got 2 different dates if any of you look back. Original date of submission was the 15th, but they have extended that until the 24th. And then the board, once you guys approve the plan, then you will see that we have to have that to the State Department of Education for approval by that 24th. So we obviously have to have that from you, and then they will give us feedback. They could come back and say, you need to add this, you need to take this out, you need to do this. As Dr. Royster said, our team, Tara, Susan, and I've been in contact with the State Department on some of the plans. They have not reviewed all of them. We have actually preliminarily submitted the plans for them to give feedback to us. We wanted to have as much possible for you before you approved it to make sure that the State Department didn't have any issues with it. But once they approve that, then that's when we talked about they have to be posted on the websites, school district and state websites as well. The State Department will apprise the Board of Education on the school's progress every quarter. We do not know what that's going to look like. We've asked that clarification question. Again, we only really have about 3 months once this is approved, so there's not really a quarter. The state references a 30, 60, 90-day plan, so we're getting clarification. We have not gotten that back from the State Department Office of Transformation yet to find out that we have to report 30, 60, 90 days, or are we going to do a quarterly report? So we'll have that information hopefully soon. And then the schools do have to inform the parents of the underperforming rating. So once you approve, the State Department approves, and they say the plans are good to go, the school has to inform the parents of the rating. Again, most of them know that already because they did that through this process. And then they have to also provide the outlining the steps of the turnaround plan. So not only here's where we are in status, here's what we're going to do to improve our rating in our school. So unsatisfactory schools, very similar. There's a little bit of a nuance change. They had to notify the parents in writing, all parents in writing, and then they also had to hold an actual in-person meeting about the rating. So unlike the previous below average schools that just notify and pull a committee together, our 2 schools that were in unsatisfactory, they actually did have to have a community meeting to talk to the parents about that. They also would have presented at that point in time some of the strategies and some of the things they were doing to improve the plan, improve the school, and then also had to assemble that whole team, just like below average schools did, to get input on the plan, strategies, action items, all of those types of things. I won't go through 3 ABC. That's the same as the previous slide as far as what they have to do to include and build that turnaround plan. That link, by the way, in there is just to the template that's in there. That's just what the State Department provided for us. And then again, this for the most part is pretty much same here, except for one caveat there is just that number 9 for unsatisfactory schools. There's these 2 unsatisfactory schools. Once the department approves it, so January 24th, or probably will be February something when the department has time, obviously, to read them. Upon the department approval, we have to immediately list the strategic plan as a topic on the local school board meeting agenda at least once a quarter. So that's the one change in unsatisfactory. State board also gets the updates from this as well. And again, we're seeking clarification on once a quarter. What does that mean? Because it doesn't really seem reasonable to go past October, because by then those schools are probably off the list. So I'm not sure that there's reason to update at that point, because the schools are probably not even the same list anymore. So we're also seeking clarification from the State Department, have not heard back yet on what does that look like. So the turnaround plan components, you can see again, all those components in that template, as I mentioned, those are all required by the State Department. We did not alter that template, so everything that's in there was asked for by the State Department in that template they gave us. The other thing to note is that most of these strategies are not new. A lot of this was already being pulled in most cases from CSI plans, priority plans, or Title I plans. As you know, again, in Title I schools, they have to go through a process to actually build their Title I plan, get community input, strategies, all that. A lot of that, the State Department's direction was just pull all that over into your plan. It's all federal money, it's all state money, just pull that into your plan as well. So make sure all those plans are combined into one. Now, not every single thing, if you've looked at a Title I plan, is fairly lengthy, so you're not going to pull everything into there, but for those categories that actually impact instruction, look at pulling those over from your CSI and your Title I plans. So that's why on a column, if you actually look at the plan, not the overview PowerPoint, but if you look at the actual plan, you're going to see what funding source it is. If it says CSI or Title I, that's already in a Title I or CSI plan. That's not something we did right now. We had to have those done last year or beginning of this year. So you can kind of see what those things are. And then there's several things in the plans that you're going to see as assistant superintendents go over. There's some things we're already doing. We know Dreambox is effective. The State Department actually did a huge study on Dreambox across the state. That's our math elementary remediation program. Very effective program. The state pays for that. Many of our schools wrote that into their plan because it's an effective strategy. But again, that's something that the State Department is paying for. You're familiar with our predictive mastery assessments. Some of you know that as Mastery Connector TE21. Those are already being paid for. We've been paying for those out of general fund for years. Schools, though, put that as a strategy because it's a critical strategy so they can progress monitor students' progress every, 3 times a year. So include in existing state or federal plans, that again was a requirement from the State Department. And then all schools are required to have turnaround plans. For us, our currently focused schools, those 7 schools that you saw, we have about 15, 16 focus schools a year that we work with. All of the schools that are currently listed are focus schools for us. They've been a focus school either this year or multiple years that we've been working with them. So the assistant superintendents are going to kind of go through at a high level for you the plan, the actual turnaround plans or the continuous improvement plans. They're called SIP plans and turnarounds plans is what the state law says, but the State Department calls this a continuous improvement plan or a CIP plan. So that's what the assistant superintendents are going to go through. So we're going to start with Dr. Megan Mitchell-Hofer to do her several schools.
Okay. Good morning. Grove and Sioux Cleveland both have similar plans, so I'm going to combine several things that they both have in their plans and explain those. As you can see, the format that the state sent, each of the performance goal ones are goal 1 is focused on access to instruction. And with that said, Grove and Sioux Cleveland have worked diligently. Both principals are brand new to the schools. Stephanie Reese is at Grove. She is a veteran principal. She actually is a turnaround principal, and she is working very diligently with that staff. Each of the schools have created master schedules that allow for teachers to have that extended time to plan. With that said, Mrs. Reese and Ms. Dunnigan have experience in creating school schedules that maximize that instructional time, but also supports teachers in their professional learning communities, making it possible for them to be able to analyze the data, to plan, to model, and to receive necessary coaching for their teachers. The master schedule also allows for students with special needs and MLL students to be pulled at the same time, maximizing instruction and decreasing transition. The goal is that no student will miss Tier 1 instruction due to intervention. That is offered at a different time. Tier 2 and 3 supports occur in addition to core instruction as appropriate. Additional planning days have been outlined for staff members and teachers and administration to work with SPED and MLL support personnel each year to build into the schedule opportunities for students not to miss that Tier 1 instruction. That has been occurring for the last few years. So support personnel are held to maximize access to Tier 1 instruction. That is performance goal 1 for both schools. Strategies and the description and action items, also the professional development, I will summarize in this. Integration of reading content occurs with fidelity and consistency. Teachers are trained in letters and utilize a state-approved curriculum called SAVIS MyView. Letters training is scientific strategies of reading and increases in reading scores we're seeing this past year. We were very pleased with the results that we saw. Weekly PLCs are held to ensure that daily literacy instruction includes strategies that are aligned with the science of reading. PLC meetings include ML co-teachers and resource teachers to determine student needs. That is the importance of the master schedule being built so that this vertical articulation and everyone around the table that supports the students are able to plan together and to meet. Overall, pushing support into the classroom versus a full pull-out model benefits all students because more hands are in the classroom and more students are receiving support. In the area of math, the same practices occur with the support of an assigned academic specialist and the instructional coach. As Mr. McCoy stated earlier, we are utilizing state resources such as Dreambox. We also utilize Bridges as a resource for our students. But during PLCs, the IC may also discuss what the standard is, actually stating, and also model the skill and coach if needed. And lastly, under professional development, we as a district are going through Solution Tree, Professional Learning Communities Planning, and quarterly focus school meetings are held. We want to be able to have PLC planning time, which once again goes back to the master schedule, where teachers are able to have that time and that dialogue. Our special education data also is included in this, and we want to ensure that compliance, fidelity of instruction, and the use of reading horizons to monitor student growth, which is another resource for our special education students. Each school also uses Lexia school-wide. Our district is using Lexia in all of our schools. Most of our schools that are Title I have purchased a license for all students to be able to participate, particularly with MLL students. This allows for them to have in-class Tier 2 intervention versus being pulled out. So I've just summarized basically the strategies, the goals. Each goal for each school is different for ELA and math, but the performance goal 1 is the standard that all students will receive Tier 1 instruction, and that will not be missed.
Good morning, everybody. At Lakeview Middle School, the first performance goal focuses on their language arts scores and, of course, increasing those through a focus on Tier 1, 2, and 3 support, so looking at across the board at different things. Some of the strategies that the school will be utilizing through this process, of course, focuses on training and support around high-yield strategies focused largely in reading and in writing. We also will be really doing a lot of deep dive work around multilingual student support, so looking at how we're supporting our students who speak other languages, as well as looking at our students who receive special education services and how to lean in on their needs and supports more specifically. Additionally, these strategies focus in on our work around AVID and how we continue to train folks around content-specific strategies using the AVID framework. These funds that are through the CSI work will also allow attendance at conferences and trainings where teachers will be exposed to schools similar to theirs, as well as have access to other training and professionals outside of the district. We also built into these strategies summer planning times and days for teachers to come together to put together content work, build lesson plans and assessments before the school year even begins. We've done that for a number of years at lots of schools, and we found that to be tremendously successful as we begin the year. For goal 2, at Lakeview, we focus in on math, and you can see we're looking to increase the math performance significantly there. These funds help provide first a summer program for our students who speak other languages to allow them to come in and to receive some accelerated math support. We've actually expanded that to include lots of students, particularly students who may be deficient in multiple areas, by really focusing in on some of the basic skills pieces, as well as looking at some critical skills and reasoning. This also allows for summer planning sessions for special educators to work together with math teachers to help plan, put together curriculum supports, and really be prepared for the launch of the school year. This also allows for software purchases for both remediation and acceleration, as well as helping us to build in strategies for more consistent, common, formative, and summative assessments in the classroom. And in our goal 3, our main strategies, of course, center around science. However, we're really focusing in on content literacy across the curriculum, so looking at how do we increase a focus on reading and writing in all content levels in a very focused way, using our common rigorous assessment, so really helping teachers focus on writing great questions. How do we help them really speak the language of the standards and really focus in on how to best assess students across, as well as helping students through their goal setting process to really build great strategies and providing more resources within the intervention time that's built into the schedule to support student growth. And of course, as we all know, to help build that equity piece, we are working on our launch of our Elevate initiative at Lakeview as well. At Berea, for Goal 1, the school chose to focus in on their number of students who have access to higher level courses. So the goal was centered around increasing the students who have access to gifted and honors classes by 15% this year. To do that, the school introduced universal reading screeners so that teachers have full knowledge of where students are and what skills they may lack or what training or extra resources they may need. Also, we've looked at how to identify additional students as gifted using our full measure or full battery of resources that the district has access to, as well as looking at providing students more training and information for families about available magnet programs for high school, or allowing them more opportunities to visit and to look at resources such as Fine Arts Center or Career Centers as they prepare for that high school transition. And also increasing the number of teachers who are gifted endorsed. Goal 2 centers around the WICOR strategies, which of course is part of the AVID initiative, and WICOR stands for Writing, Inquiry, Collaboration, Organization, and Reading. And of course, these are assessed through the annual assessment that our AVID schools participate in. And our goal here is to increase the number of teachers who are utilizing WICOR strategies on a daily basis. And so our goal here is to increase, of course, the amount of professional development around these strategies. How do we help teachers to better utilize these? How do we help our students to better respond to these strategies? We will, of course, increase the amount of teacher observations and, most importantly, the feedback that we're providing to our teachers. This allows for a strategy to center around our planning days to make sure that we're more intentionally planning those strategies within our lesson plans, focusing on our multi-tiered systems of support to both decrease behavior issues while increasing engagement in lessons centered around utilizing these WICOR strategies. Also continuing our AVID partnership by continuing to send teachers for additional training and support on using AVID strategies within the framework to improve student achievement. And the final goal for Berea Middle is to increase the number of students, of course, who are met or at the meets and exceeds level for SC Ready. And of course, in addition to all the other strategies, we'll provide classroom supplies to ensure that students have what they need to be successful. Looking at how do we provide additional curriculum support for both math and language arts especially, but really looking at math by the addition of a program called Big Ideas, which was a math curriculum that students currently use in elementary school. We extended that into middle school to provide additional supports for students across so that they have a familiar math program as they enter middle school. It just extends and it helps really shore up and support some of those deficient areas. And this also allows for additional technology resources and support for both remediation and acceleration. And it provides some additional after-school opportunities for students to engage in to receive both remediation and acceleration.
Morning. You will hear very similar, in some cases, strategies and action items for the three high schools, Berea, Carolina, and Southside, as you did with Megan and David. You'll also hear some very similar things among the three schools as well. Berea High's first goal is to increase the four-year cohort graduation rate. Some of the strategies and action items that are key there are tutoring, both during school and after school by teachers. As you'll recall, Berea and Carolina both have on-track facilitators in the schools that assist with keeping students on track, and that on-track facilitator will continue to monitor that data. Summer school, which is of course available to all of our high schools, including these three, they will continue to utilize that. Berea uses instructional aids during the school year to being in labs, in initial credit labs. Also, students are able to complete virtual courses, credit recovery, in order to catch up on graduation if they've fallen behind. The utilization of the community and schools counselors, there's 2 inside of the school to help track around 50 student caseloads each to provide ongoing mentoring services. Review of schedules, this is a very purposeful strategy we could do at high school, is that schools can specifically schedule students with specific teachers and or in specific groups so as to provide them the best opportunities for success in those classes. And a lot of training going on at Berea High School to progress monitor a lot of those practices as well. Their second goal is to increase academic achievement. You can see from 8.26 points on the report card to 10.26. Tutoring is a big piece of that again. Tier 2 interventions also is an action item for Berea. And of course, teachers at all high schools, including these 3 schools that we're talking about today, have common planning within the end of course test. So all English 2 have common planning on the block. So that allows those teachers to meet together to plan, but also to go over district benchmarks when our Mastery Connect data comes back to them. Of course, we have Read 180. You will remember possibly that Read 180 began as a special education initiative for our students who had literacy gaps, but we've expanded that into the general ed. Now any student who has a Lexile that qualifies for remediation or the use of Read 180 is given that opportunity, so that's a big strategy as well. Also, I mentioned the common planning. You heard David talk about AVID. That is at Berea, specifically at the 9th grade. And they use the Wicker strategies as well. The third goal at Berea High is to improve the academic achievement. And again, that one of those strategies includes increased and more purposeful Mosaic instructional observations. Through Mosaic, our academic specialists can also see those observations, can read them, and when need be, provide support to both the school with those teachers, but in some cases directly with those teachers as needed. Again, tutoring and Tier 2 interventions are again a key in that strategy as well. And then their third goal is for preparing for success and moving that number from 2.29 to 3.5 on the report card. Again, same strategies, benchmark data, Read 180 as well in that. Carolina High School, first goal is to increase on-time graduation rate from 70.9% to 77%. Some of the action items that Carolina is utilizing for that, of course, tutoring, summer school, also summer scheduling. You saw that at Berea as well, being purposeful about where those students are scheduled and what teachers. Carolina also uses the content recovery aids to facilitate the labs. On-track facilitator is at Carolina High School as well, and the community and schools counselors are there as well, just like in Berea. The school staff has attended district graduation rate training to ensure current state guidance adherence. That is provided by Dr. McCreary and his department. And the school administration will present specific school strategies for each staff members and how they can help with graduation rate. Of course, a lot of times that focuses on seniors, but the focus should be further down, even down to the 9th grade, so you don't get in a hole. The second goal at Carolina High School is the performance rating on academic achievement. Some of the action items include, you heard David also talk about Solution Tree and our professional learning communities and that training. They're going through that. In fact, they were the first school last year to go through it, even before we kind of systemically did it at all of our schools. Focus support, of course, all 3 of these schools are focus schools, and so we're in those schools monthly. Ms. Dean, myself, the academic department, an academic specialist. 40 hours of summer collaborative planning for their teachers to come in over the summer and help plan. A couple of other strategies in this one is building a literacy-rich school environment. Again, disciplinary literacies. Mr. Carrick is very big on that, and he has made that a item of focus. I've already mentioned the solution tree training, the district specialists assisting during the focus school, and again, the training of PLCs through solution tree. The third goal, Carolina, is to improve its performance rating in the graduation cohort of college and career readiness from 43.4% to 55%. The action items there include increasing the number of students graduating as CTE completers inside the building with certification. Also, test preparation for students who are taking the WIN Career Readiness Assessment, ASVAB, AccuPlacer, SAT, and ACT. All of those are assessments that can make a student, if they're successful on them, college and career ready. So giving them some front-end preparation for that ahead of taking the assessments. Expanding dual enrollment and advanced place courses for students, and increasing the number of students participating and completing their local and attending local career centers. Southside High School, first goal for Southside is to increase the rating from below average to average on on-time graduation from 65 to 70%. Graduation rate meetings, each grade level team is a big action item for that. They meet 3 times a semester to assess grades, attendance, social, emotional needs of each at-risk student. Mentoring, set up a mentoring program with students who are the most at risk, and those mentors are spending at least 30 minutes a week and report back to admin and guidance. After school tutoring. New this year at Southside is tutoring pullouts. Students are pulled out of non-core classes at times during the school day to provide academic assistance in the core content courses for which they're struggling in. And again, summer school, that's a very typical strategy that they may use. Also at Southside, they, much like Carolina Berea, use content recovery aids to facilitate the learning labs. They have a 12th grade aide that is systemically reviewing attendance, behavior, and academic process to identify students in need of additional support. And one action item for them also in this is to increase the number of observations in Mosaic to provide teachers with feedback. And finally, for goal 1, guidance, again, maintaining their caseloads to ensure more attention is given to students. AVID training with the Wicker standards as well is going on at Southside, and professional development focused on promoting student engagement, literacy, and test-taking skills. Second goal for Southside is to improve the importance rating on preparing for success. Again, similar. I won't repeat each of these. One difference here is book talks with instructional coaches throughout the district. That's a strategy you haven't heard from before with the high schools. All of those have already been stated. The one that is new or you haven't heard of is UDL, that's Universal Design for Learning, which is a strategy to help all students in strategies to help teachers help students in terms of meeting those needs during the academic classes. And let's see, I think the final goal is for, again, improve the academic rating by increasing the earned points in academic achievement. Again, very similar. Additional coaching cycles is maybe a strategy you haven't heard there that they are doing. And also the school-wide professional development with Solution Tree, which we've already mentioned. And those are the 3 goals for the 3 high schools.
And that there is the previous slide had the glossary of terms, just because I know there were some terms thrown out like Wicker strategies and AVID and all of those types of things. So, excuse me, if you come across an acronym in the plan you don't know, hopefully it's in that glossary. We tried to pull everything out and put it in the glossary that we could think of. And then finally, the recommended motion, of course, from the administration is that we approve the continuous improvement plans for Grove, Sioux Cleveland, Berea, Lakeview Middle, Berea High, Carolina, and Southside High School as presented. And at this point, we're open to any questions you might have.
Ms. Michelle?
Thank you for this presentation. I have a couple of questions. With since this is transformational, and you said something about the Office of Transformation at the State Department. Will our transformational assistant superintendent be part of any of this? I know that one of the schools, Lakeview, is on this list, but will our new assistant superintendent be part of all of this?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. McDavid actually is still keeping Title I under her purview in her new role as Assistant Superintendent for Transformation, and also the state designation. So while the schools report still to the Assistant Superintendents, Dr. McDavid is very heavily involved with Dr. Brink, and really all of my team, but overseeing the plans for CSI, ATSI, all those state designation schools, and any of the schools that will be on this list.
I'm glad that you said that you would have in the glossary what all of these acronyms mean, because I was writing them down, and I'll be looking at that. I have one more question. How many of the AP classes do these schools, when we talked about high school, how many AP classes do we have in these high schools as compared to the other high schools? Because I know at one time, we didn't have a whole lot of AP classes in these schools. So how many do we have now?
I could get you the exact number. It is going to be slightly less than schools in similar size that those schools. Obviously, sometimes the smaller the school, the bigger the challenge it is to offer a robust AP program. I will say that we have the 3 White Horse Road schools, Southside, Berea, and Carolina, PLC, in fact, we met this fall to encourage those schools to offer the AP courses, and if they cannot make those AP courses due to enrollment, to look at sharing. For instance, it wouldn't take a student very long to go from Berea to Carolina to take the AP course if we set that structure up. So one of the advantages you'll recall with going to one schedule is that all of our schools would be on one schedule, and we could create opportunities for students to take a course at another school if that course is offered. So the hope is even though the schools may not offer individually more AP courses next year, students will have more opportunities to take AP courses next year.
Are any of them going to be virtual, or it has to be in person?
We've taught both ways. In other words, the student would be able to log on from their home high school with that teacher, and also if they have transportation, to go physically sit into the classroom. Both ways.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. Ms. Dewey.
So my question is more about the State Department. Mr. McCoy, maybe
Yes, ma'am.
to you. So all of this is based on schools' performance for 2022 and 2023 school year. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, correct.
And then the ratings come out this year and the plan is submitted, and then it goes into effect for 2024, 25?
So it actually goes into effect immediately upon approval from the State Department.
Which might be,
I'm thinking it's probably going to be February before it gets approved.
and then how long does the action, how long does this plan continue?
So we would continue, the majority of these strategies that you're seeing in here are already in other plans, like our CSI and Title I plan. So these are ones technically that we do regularly anyway and tweak. Technically though, May is when the students would take the tests and the new data would already be set. So technically, you know, if these are approved in February, you really only have about 3 months, really 2 months, because the month of May is pretty much testing. You really only have about 2 months that these plans are really in place for this purpose of turnaround.
And then they stay in place next school year also, or no?
They do not, they technically.
This is a lot of work for 2 months.
You are correct. And that's one of the answers we've asked the State Department to kind of explain their expectation, because certainly by October 15th, we have new data. So, you know, again, the hopes is all 7 of those come off that list. That's not to say we wouldn't continue doing some of those strategies, obviously, still to keep improvement. But technically, the plan itself, in just my opinion, Jeff's opinion, in Jeff's opinion, really the May date of when students take the test, that's when technically we've done everything that year for our students that we're going to do, obviously, because they've taken the test. The data we have is the data we have. The State Department question has been, do we continue to report to you after May on these plans in progress, or once the tests are taken, is it done because the student's date is finished? It would not exceed, in my opinion, it would not exceed past October 15th, though, because there'd be schools no longer on this list, so there'd be no relevance to report anymore.
If it perhaps makes you feel a little bit better about it, most all these things we're already doing with
Yes, sir.
schools, in some cases with all schools, but more focused on schools that are struggling with performance.
Correct.
So we didn't just all of a sudden start doing all these things. We won't all of a sudden stop doing them. But to the point that you brought up and that Jeff has made, this is a whole lot of bureaucratic work for a window of time, in essence, January, February, March, April, and the first week of May.
Yeah.
Then we start over next year, and we could have schools that, I believe I'm right in saying this, Jeff, who stay the same, then they'll go into this status.
Correct.
They didn't grow, they stayed the same.
Correct.
But the average is no longer the same. So you stayed average, but no, now you're one of these designated schools. I'm also not sure, and we're certainly going to report quarterly. What are we going to report? To Jeff's point, there's really only one quarter in there. But even in that quarter, what are we going to report? That we're doing the things we said we were going to do. I guess that'd be the only thing we can report, because we don't have any results. Now, at least if it were a year-long thing, we could report our fall benchmark testing. We could report our mid-year benchmark testing. Then we could report the final test. So technically, you'd have 3 outcomes to report in over 4 quarters. We've got 1 outcome to report. We've already done the mid-year testing.
Yeah, first 2 testing are done.
So the only outcome we got to report is the outcome of the scores in May, which we'll get the end of June.
Usually into July, before the state test scores are back. We get some back in June.
In August, I guess we'll issue a quarterly report
Right.
of those test scores, which may or may not move them out of that status. We won't know that until October. Then we will start the wheel turning again.
Yes. And just as a reminder, Dr. Royster, the test scores technically in August are not on embargo. Those are for
Yeah,
us. We cannot discuss publicly.
So we couldn't give you a report of those scores in August. We can talk to the schools about it.
Correct.
And unless they change, I don't believe the State Department can talk to the state board about it. Because once it goes to the state board, well, that's public information then. This was a system imposed, I believe, by statutory requirement, not regulation. So this came from the legislature.
And all of these.
And for us, you know, we can't speak for other school districts. I can speak for some that I know about, but I know more about than I do others. These are the things you're putting in here are things you're already doing to work with schools that are having difficulties. This just adds a whole nother layer of reporting and bureaucracy. And every time you do that, you're taking the same people that we use to help the schools advance and redirecting their time to making reports and filling out forms, as opposed to actually getting in there and working alongside our principals and our faculties to move student performance forward. It's extremely frustrating, and I'm sure you all feel that way as well.
And I will just remind you, I should have said this in the presentation, I will just remind you that in elementary, middle school, to Dr. Doris's point, you all remember from the focus school, or from the workshop we did, all of our schools, for the most part, all of our schools, for example, in ELA grew. So you might look and say, well, how is somebody on a below average list if they grew in test scores? To Dr. Royce's point about the accountability model, though, the state grew 7 points on average across the state in ELA. So some of these schools on here in ELA grew 3 points. They still grew, but because they did not grow at the same rate as the State Department, they're penalized for that on the report card in their growth measure because they did not keep pace or above with the State Department. So that's how they can kind of fall in there and still be performing They're just not performing where they need to be, which again, hopefully will, again, with these strategies, help them with that. High school, it's grad rate. We were still recovering the last 2 years, if you will recall. When a child leaves us, we are responsible for telling the state where that child is. If we cannot, we get penalized for that on grad rate. So if we cannot track that child down and say, they enrolled at this school, they're over here, they're being homeschooled, or verify they left the country, went back to their home country, if we can't verify that, we get penalized. So that's your grad rate piece. So then for high schools, the 3 schools really that fell into that unsatisfactory piece here, it was because of their grad rate. Now again, we're in a good footing this year already working with those schools, getting that grad rate back up. Now that we're kind of out of the pandemic, a lot of kids that we couldn't identify because they went back maybe their home countries and things, that kind of has cycled through. So right now we feel like we're on a great track when meeting with all 3 of these high schools, that their grad rate will be well above that 70% range, and we'll be back on track for grad rate.
They continuously track their 9GR throughout the year to see if they're on pace to graduate. So we've got a really good idea the further we go into school year, and certainly by now, that it would appear right now they're all on the road to being above the 70%, which is what got them there to begin with. And it's those people that, we've talked about that before, Jeff just mentioned it, they just literally disappeared. And we can't just say that's where they went. We have to provide some sort of documentation this is where they went. And particularly with students that have come from another country and often disappear. They may have disappeared somewhere else in the U.S., or they may have gone back to that country or gone to another country. And we have really zero ability to track them. So it's extremely challenging.
Anything else, Ms. Dillon?
No, that's it. Thank you so much.
Ms. Middleton?
Thank you. So basically, the state requires us to teach to their test. Is that right? I mean, we pretty much have to.
We're required to cover the standards that the state sets forth, and then that test is based on those standards.
Okay, so teachers are, the teachers know exactly what's going to be on that test,
No.
No,
or do they?
we do not. We have a state blueprint that kind of helps guide that, but as I think Dr. Royce has mentioned this many times, there's more standards in every subject and content area than we can possibly cover. So we do what's called in academics and the schools and the state, we try to prioritize standards for those things that we know are the big standards that are going to be most likely tested. And then the state does release a blueprint, but it is not by far, these are the standards and indicators that will be tested on the test this year. It is to a degree a guessing game of which pieces will be on the test and which ones won't.
I mean, the theory behind what's done is sound. The application is not. For any course, particularly if you think about your experience teaching at high school level, you want every student in calculus or every student in biology or every student in U.S. history to have mastered certain concepts in that subject. And that should be the same for all biology classes, all calculus classes, all U.S. history classes. And should be developed by people that are expert in that area, teachers, instructional people that are expert in those subject areas. All that happens. Here's the part that moves it from a sound theory to an unsound practical application. Those groups of people have decided you need to know, we'll make up a number, 100 points of information of varying degrees of difficulty in asking the question, but that's fine too. You need to be rigorous. All right, so you're gonna cover 100 things as a teacher, but we're only gonna ask about 50 of those, and we're not gonna tell you which 50. You can't teach, take that example to the next level. We're gonna tell you there's 100 things. We're only gonna test 50, but you only have time to teach 75 of them. So now you got to decide, which ones do I cover? Well, your first priority should be those that are building to the next course if it's sequential. Certain concepts more important to continuing on than other concepts are. But you can never figure out All right, I know I need to make sure my students are prepared for these 50 things because we know there's going to be a test. We don't know what the questions are. We don't know how many will be at each level of questioning, but we know, all right, I need to teach these 50 things. And if I've done a good job teaching those 50 things, then our students are going to do very well on the test. We wouldn't let our teachers, a principal wouldn't allow their teachers, and a good teacher wouldn't want to give a test on something they hadn't taught. That's educational malpractice. Yet we have a system that routinely tests students on material they may or may not have been taught. That's wrong. But that's the system that we have. Nothing wrong with having a system. It's appropriate to have expectations. It's appropriate to have differing levels of rigor. To me, it's important that we teach consistently, not how every teacher teaches, but the content they teach. Because every student that passes through geometry in Greenville County schools should know the basic same concepts of geometry, or English literature, or U.S. history. It doesn't matter what the subject is. So we've taken something that was sound in theory, and by its application, it's been converted into something that is not sound. But that's the system that we work within.
Sounds very difficult. On your goals that you set, do you set those numbers, like for instance, like Carolina High, they have 70% graduation rate, and you say the goal is to get to 77%. Is that something that the state tells you you have to do, or is that just like arbitrary, let's give it 5 points?
It's not arbitrary. Mr. Reimer can speak to the process they go through goal setting, but it is done in conjunction with Dr. McCurry's office so that we're not setting goals that cannot be reached. So it's not arbitrary, but then Mr. Reimer can kind of walk through the process they follow to actually set those goals with principals.
Yeah, part of it was, as Dr. Royster mentioned a moment ago, they're tracking by grade level the cohort. So they could already kind of crystal ball see what was coming up this year and knew that 77% was a very attainable goal for them. Also, to get well above 70%, and I would say 7% is well above 70%, it takes out being so close in June and July, being within a student making it through summer school or not of staying over 70%. So it kind of pads, if you will, a little bit the difference there. But the goal, this particular goal was set because they were tracking those juniors who are now in class as a senior, and they knew that 77 was a very attainable goal and not what we would call a stretch goal, meaning, yeah, you set a big number there, but you have no chance of getting it. I believe, I have to go back to my notes, but at the fall goal conference, they were projecting right at that 77% number.
Achievable.
Yes.
How does this relate to the Elevate program? Is it just like corollary to the Elevate program? I noticed that Alexandra wasn't in here.
So this is not related to that process. Now, Lakeview, we do have strategies in here that's tied directly to the Elevate. Alexander, though, did not fall. The only way you can be on this list is if you're below average or unsatisfactory on the report card. Alexander was average on their report card.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Middleton. Ms. Mosley?
Thank you, Ms. Leventis-Wells. I just have a couple questions for point of clarity. I noticed on both the elementary plans, there was a specific action item that had to do with literacy strategies aligning with science of reading. Are we shifting back towards more of a science of reading? I know we've done balanced literacy for a while?
Yes, ma'am. So we have the GCS literacy framework that we use. It takes the best science of reading, if you will, strategies, that research body that's out there, although that's now been coined as science of reading has now been coined as a program as well now. But we have that plan that we use. The State Department, of course, with letters training that was mentioned, the Savas curriculum was mentioned, all that is based on science of reading. So while you'll still see some strategies from balanced literacy, the ones that have worked for our students in the framework, we really are compiling that framework that Dr. Stevens does through her office and Ms. Dean does at the secondary level, is really compiling the best strategies that work for students. Because there were certainly some things in balanced literacy that worked well for us, and our kids had growth. But when it doesn't work for a kid, then we have a lot of other strategies that work, science of reading and otherwise, that work for students who are struggling to read. We are overall shifting, though, more towards the science of reading approach, if you will, strategy-wise.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Yes, it's just a slow.
So I guess the bigger question is for our schools that aren't necessarily on these plans, but obviously all of them deal with students that are struggling. We're using some of those same program or curriculums or programs or whatever, Sava, whatever, I didn't hear.
Savas was one of the ones that I believe it's 9 schools now that are using.
Okay.
The State Department, when those schools that were on the Palmetto literacy list, the ones that had 30%, less than 30% of their students passing the reading test, they were required to go through letters training and to choose one of the state-approved curriculums, which is all science of reading based. We chose Sava, so that's 9 schools. The other curriculum paths that they can choose from, because again, we're making that transition. The other curriculum paths they can choose from are all going to have science of reading flavors in there as far as the strategies goes for students.
Okay. Well, I'm very happy to hear that we're shifting back towards that. The summer planning, I know we've been told this, but please remind me. Are these additional planning weeks that we're requiring teachers to attend, or is that something they would have always attended, and do we pay them for their time?
Yeah, so these, if I remember correctly, these schools here, elementary, the middle two, those are Title I schools. Almost all of our Title I schools build in summer planning days. Okay. Teachers typically are doing that anyway, so that's the Title I schools, because they have Title I plans and money, they can pay those teachers to come in and do that planning. It's just a little easier to get them jump started on the year versus trying to do that on that very hectic first week. I don't know, does Berea and Southside also, and Carolina also pays probably their EOC more courses. It may not be the whole school, but select grades or select subjects, they will pay teachers to come in and work as a PLC during the summer.
Okay, so all of these strategies that also include like professional development for these specific plans, is that additional professional development that we're requiring of them, or is that in lieu of maybe other professional development they would have done? I mean, are we substituting something that's more specific for their needs?
Yes.
In other words, I'm just making sure what we're asking of teachers is reasonable. And
yeah, so it's kind of both. The district level obviously provides professional development. We do a lot more these days where we go to schools or regions to do it versus a big, wide central level. For example, we're doing solution tree training, which is the heavy professional learning communities professional development. That's, we gather principals once a month, principals ICs once a month, assistant principals to go through that professional development. In addition, the schools, several of our schools have then themselves, as part of their PD plan, they have contracted with Solution Tree to come in and work with their teachers during their planning periods, during their PLCs as professional development. All of our schools are required to offer professional development so the teachers can get their certification points, 120 over the course of a 5-year period. So they're required to offer X amount per year. Teachers don't necessarily have to get X amount per year. They just have to have 120 total. Most, though, try to break that up so they're not having to get 120 their year 5. So it's kind of both. Every school with assistant superintendents develops a professional development plan that the school offers, and then the district offers, and those are usually very connected. What we're offering is usually what the school's focusing on as well.
Okay, just curious. Southside High School. I saw or heard Mr. Reimer talk about pullouts. That's something new that they're doing. Can you just speak more to who's doing the pullout, and then what qualifies a student? Obviously, they're struggling in a core class. A core class. Normally, my experience with pullouts is a student usually qualifies under an IEP or something like that, but are these students that may not have those, I guess, qualify under that circumstance, but they're qualifying a different way just based on performance in class?
That is exactly correct.
Okay.
It's the students, not students with disabilities that are
Right.
already receiving resource services, right? Where these are general education students typically that are struggling in the course, and it's not permanent. They will, for instance, on a Friday, each day of the week is a different one. Let's just say Friday is algebra, okay? So any student who is struggling in algebra will get pulled out of maybe PE that day or whatever elective that they are in. They will go back to their algebra teacher who is on planning, okay, for reteaching and getting work turned in, any of the things from which they are not being successful in. And so it's a model that Woodmont used a lot in terms of their academic improvement to become a Palmetto's finest. So it has some pros and cons to it, because if a student is struggling in all 4 core classes, it could mean one week he gets pulled out of his elective classes 4 times, which is not ideal, because we want them to be in those classes as well, because they're getting a Carnegie credit for those classes as well. We don't want them to fall behind in those courses, but that's the model, if that answers your question.
Well, that's what I was curious about, is it I heard you say new model, but it sounds like we've done it at another school with some success. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. Are we still using the same credit and content recovery tools that we've used in the past?
Yes.
Okay. We're happy with those?
The
reason I asked that question, y'all know I'm not I don't love them. There were some limitations, I felt like. What is it called?
The current one is Edgenuity.
Edgenuity, yeah. There were some limitations where it locked, like I was talking about access to it, and it locks people out, and
so
it's pretty self-directed, right? I mean,
to a degree, yes. So there's 2 of them. The State Department has one that they use for the credit recovery, and then I'm not sure which their vendor is that they use, or if they do that their own. The Edgenuity piece, we've used Apex in the past, which is now Edmentum, and then Edgenuity. There's not a lot of vendors out there on the market. All of them do some sort of locking, though, to prevent the cheating aspect of it. So, we have assessed, and we do continue regularly assess, but they're all content's the only thing that really differs. We switched from Apex to Edgenuity because of the content differences, and the technology was very old at the time with them.
so is our model still to have someone in like maybe not necessarily a content expert overseeing a class where where the students are individually working and learning almost in a virtual way, and if they need support, then someone's there to help them, but it might not be someone that knows anything about math, and if they're working on math, I'm just trying to understand how that's.
Yeah, it differs by school.
Effective.
Mr. Reimer probably can speak to some of the ways. I think COVID gave us, Monday gave us some good ways to try to perfect that a little bit better. So I think, Mr. Reimer, some of that stuff's still in place.
Yeah, so, and to your point, let's say you were an English teacher and you were in that lab, a certified English teacher, you still may not be able to help them with the math of the class, because that's just not your strength. All 3 schools are using aides as lab managers to be in the lab. All 3 schools, and that would be pretty consistent across all the high schools. What each school does differently and tweaks differently is the push in by the content teachers. So again, kind of going back to that explanation I gave you earlier, the students in the lab every period, the same period every day of the week. On Monday, it may be an algebra teacher that comes in and provides support to any of the students in there that need help with algebra. On Tuesday, it might be the U.S. history. On Wednesday, it might be a different. Sometimes they have teachers check in on them every day. It varies from school to school, but there are content teachers pushing in typically on their planning period. They'll walk down to the lab to see if any students need any assistance, or have the students sent to their classroom. It works both ways.
Okay, I guess there's no perfect way to do that, but, and then the last question I have was about transportation. I think I heard you when Ms. Kyle asked the question about AP classes. You said you were hoping that we would open up opportunities for students to be able to access other classes. Do they have to provide their own transportation? In the example that you gave, there might be a Carolina high school student that can go to Berea, for example, to take would they have to be accountable for their own transportation?
Well, the conversations we had at this point would be that we would hope that if they can transport themselves, that they would do it so they could be in the room with the teacher as opposed to having that provided virtually. I have not had the conversations with Mr. James yet about whether there's opportunities to transport. Each school has buses at their school, and depending on the staff they have available, could potentially assist with that as well without having to use our regular transportation department. So those details haven't been fleshed out. What we're trying to do is identify the courses for which we have interest in, that the students sign up. Once we know which courses and how much of that we'll have to move around, then we'll work through the transportation. But one way or the other, we're not going to deny a student the opportunity to do it if they're qualified to do it because of transportation.
But they would have to do it virtually if they don't have transportation right now. They would have to, like, and so what is that? They sit in a classroom at their home high school and they're taught live? Is it live teaching?
Yeah,
Like
it
through
could
a
be.
pa-
It could
I
be
mean-
live. It could be that they take the course. Students also have AP offerings via South Carolina Virtual School, and that's another. But that's again a virtual experience, and we're trying to provide the in-person. We just haven't fleshed out all of those details yet,
Okay.
Ms. Mosley. But the goal is to increase the opportunities of those three schools to have more AP offerings.
All right, and my last question is either a Jeff or a Dr. Royster question. Why is sorry, I thought that was my last. Why is the test score data that you received in late July not public information until October or whatever, or whenever it's released?
So the big reason for that is they are still shuffling students. They have not yet applied, with the data we get, they have not yet applied the attendance rules to the students. So on the testing day for English language arts at a school, when I get that report in July, when we get that report in July, it literally is every child who tested at that school on that day. However, there could be 30 kids, 20 kids, 10 kids that technically will not be reported to that school's testing because they just got there 2 weeks prior to that school. And so they need to be referred back to they need to be put back at their other schools for the accountability's sake. So we are tweaking, Dr. McCreary, ourselves, there is even testing score changes. I'd say when I get that data back in July, we run it. Over the next couple of weeks, it continues to change by points as those kind of things even out. So the official release of the data is not until October 15th when the report card goes live. At that point, all the data and the students have been put where they're supposed to be put for accountability's sake.
In fact, in some cases, in some years, they've not met that deadline.
No.
So what value is this data in July if it's not really reflective of what the ultimate outcome is?
For our purposes, we generally know where we're going to have problems.
Okay.
Yes.
But for the purposes of like these statuses, like 1 or 2 points can make the difference whether you go above the status line or below it. So you can't really, you wouldn't want to do all this based on that. Though we do in general start working on things because it's not going to change. For very few schools, there is a change that's dramatically significant to the overall performance of that school. But a slight difference in the test score can move them from one status to another, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley. Mr. Cochran.
Thank you. I think most of my questions have been answered during the discussions. One question I still have, Mr. Reimer, those teachers that are using their planning period 1 day a week, are they compensated in any way for that exchange daytime or anything?
Not financially, but what they typically do, they're assigned, that is their duty. You'll recall as a teacher, maybe you had cafeteria duty in the morning and you stood there for 20 minutes watching kids eat breakfast. In exchange of doing that, their duty is to check in on the students in the labs, which they prefer doing. They would rather do that and help kids in their content than they would watch students eat, typically speaking.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Ms. Bush.
Yes, I would like to make a motion to approve the continuous improvement plan for Grove Elementary, Cleveland Elementary, Maria Middle. Could you put your mic on?
It's on, I just wasn't close enough. I would like to make the motion to approve the continuous improvement plans for Grove Elementary, Sue Cleveland Elementary, Berea Middle, Lakeview Middle, Berea High, Carolina High, and Southside High Schools as presented.
There's second. Second by Ms. Mosley. Discussion, I have a couple of things before we vote. I find this very interesting because I'm glad to hear we've already implemented a lot of this. Because for us to approve this today and put all these responsibilities on these teachers now to be tested in February is an injustice to them, because it's not as though they don't have enough to do. Also, with all of these action items in place, we have no control over the students who want to learn and those who choose not to learn. And I know it's a teacher's priority to encourage them to do their best, but we are penalized when students come in and they really don't care about the test, and they could just do a pattern like all C's. And I know that could happen because I've done that before, not knowing the consequences. But anyway, I always like to do art on my tests. But anyway, with that being said, the consequences are pretty severe. And then to find out that this test they will be tested in February, and then we get the results, and then we find out, no matter that we implemented this, but these schools are off the plan because they excelled, and it looks like it was because of this plan, which in truth, that's not correct. Is that correct? Am I saying that right, or?
I think the, you said.
Oh, it's in
you
May.
May.
We
Okay,
implemented in February, they take the
Yes,
test in
yes,
May.
yes, yes.
So February, March,
Yes.
April, May, 4 months, we've got to do this. And
Yeah.
then in 4 months, if they do well on this test, then it looks like we've implemented this in 4 months and look how successful it is. Where
Yeah.
until it's been prior to August.
Correct. And the only thing I would say, and yeah, probably technically 3 months, because May is pretty much all testing, but
Right.
the only thing I would say is that almost all those strategies that are in that plan are in our CSI and title plan.
Right, that's what you said.
So, technically, like you said, as you said, we've been doing it for a year, but.
So basically, this isn't anything new.
Correct.
It's just what the state wanted us to pass.
Right.
Interesting. With that being said, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for spending all this time on it as well in order to present it to us. Thank you. So there's a motion on the floor. It has been seconded. All those in favor, please address by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the motion carries. Madam Chair, I turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Levinas Wells. The next item is the administration portion. I'm going to turn that over to Ms. Doolan.
Item 4.01 is a cell phone / electronic device rule update. Dr. Royster, did you want to speak about this?
Yes, ma'am, just briefly before Mr. Webb conducts the presentation. A number of years ago, the board passed a policy to allow the utilization of cell phones and electronic devices inside our schools. Prior to that time, I think that might have been about 10 years ago. Prior to that time, those devices were prohibited for use by students, with the exception of volunteer firefighters, which is just an interesting exception, but they were allowed to maintain their electronic devices by state law. So the board took the position of freeing up from our policy the utilization of devices in class. Now, the thinking at that time, the discussion at that time, and the change at that time was based on the fact we were not a one-to-one district. We did not have electronic devices for all of our students at all grade levels throughout the system. That no longer is the case. The kinds of devices that were prevalent then did not have many of the capacities that they do now. So as you all have expressed a number of times, we have discussed with our principals the need to change our direction on that and be more restrictive with how we allow, still in accord with your policy, but how we allow devices. Because the other side of that is, for many parents, that's the way that they have to contact their child before school and after school, and the way their child has to contact them. We also always want to be keenly aware and prepared for the event of some incident that might occur in a school, where parents would need to have and want to have, to the best of their ability to do so, the immediate reassurance that their child is safe. So keeping those things in mind, we started at the outset of this year to implement some changes in procedure that we have now codified in administrative rule. As you all know, administrative rules are those rules adapted by the administration and approved by the administration pursuant to one of your policies. Mr. Webb is going to review a little more in detail the history that I described and the specific changes that we have now codified into administrative rule, but we actually have implemented these changes throughout the district already and have had very positive feedback from the school level about them. Mr. Webb?
Thank you, and that's all correct. So a little history to piggyback on Dr. Royster's introduction. In 2010, this board revised board policy JCDA to make a pretty substantial change at that time. Actually, when I started in 2009, some of the biggest or most communication I received from lawyers and parents calling up the district was about cell phones. Because the policy back in 2009 was that schools would confiscate and retain cell phones. And the policy at that time was that for the first offense, there was a warning. Second offense, it was 30 days. And then if there's another offense after that and subsequent offenses, each one was additional 60 days of retaining that cell phone. And obviously that sparked a lot of safety concerns, things of that nature. And we were not isolated. There were a lot of other school districts with similar policies and practices at that time, but certainly technology has evolved. What is needed in schools, what's acceptable, the use of technology and cell phones. So back in 2010, the board changed, as Dr. Royster outlined, the policy to really give autonomy to schools. Back then, we needed the flexibility of potentially using cell phones and other devices in the school day for instruction. But now we're at one-to-one with Chromebooks and a lot of other technology supports within the school day for students. So what we have aimed to do here for the revision of board policy, Administrative Rule JCDA, is to create consistency, okay? It's all about consistency at the different levels, elementary, middle, and high. So I want to talk to you about that. Now, for any revision of administrative rule, and in particular this one, we wanted feedback from schools. We wanted feedback from principals. Principals shared the thoughts and possible revisions to the rule and practices with SICs, with PTAs, with their staff. And we've received back and forth input from principals and administrators. So this was all done in collaboration and coordination with schools in developing these changes. The policy, I'll skip that slide since I've already spoken to it, and jump right into Administrative Rule JCDA. So the rule starts out with what is the definition of an electronic device. And it's a non-exhaustive definition, all right? Pretty broad in the sense that it gives examples, but it's a non-exhaustive definition that talks about devices that would emit an audible signal or sound, display a message or image, or otherwise deliver a communication, okay? And so it would cover cell phones, tablets, earbuds, gaming devices, things of that nature, and leave sort of the window open for similar devices in the future, okay? I mean, 10 years from now, something else could be developed, or next year, or next month, could be developed that would also fall within this definition. So the key is to have some specific information in here in the definition, but also be pretty broad. Now, we put the caveat in there in the definition for electronic devices that anything that's related to some student's health plan, far as a medical device, would not fall under this prohibition, far as that definition of an electronic device. All right. So in the second paragraph, or at the beginning of the rule, we have put in, we have emphasized this is found in other administrative rules, other practices certainly within, throughout the schools in our district, but the concept that these electronic devices cannot be used to capture or record other students and images in a way that would intimidate, threaten, and embarrass another person, okay? And so I think this is a good time for me to kind of pause for a second and say that the administrative rule that I included and sent to you 3 weeks ago and provided you notice about, we have modified it slightly based upon board member input, okay? And so in that on this slide and in the administrative rule, we have added the word record. So the rule now states students are prohibited from using electronic devices to capture images, record, or otherwise use electronic devices in a manner that harasses, humiliates, threatens, embarrasses, or intimidates another person. So that is in the current version of the administrative rule, and that's on your attached in board docs. And of course, students, if they bring their cell phones or electronic devices to schools, are responsible for the security, the possession of those devices. All right, so let's talk about the 3 different levels: elementary, middle, and high. Elementary and middle are lumped together for purposes of this administrative rule. In essence, in summary, the rules for elementary and middle is that you cannot have your electronic device out at all during the instructional day, okay? Now, there are exceptions that the principal, the school administration can make for unique circumstances. Some sort of special activity maybe, or something of that nature. But generally speaking, the rule for consistency purposes is from the start of the instructional day to the end, no electronic devices, okay? They have to be put away and remain silent, okay? That is also something that we have added in the administrative rule based upon some board member feedback. Now, for all levels, elementary, middle, and high, before and after the school day, you know, I've talked about the instructional day so far. Before and after the school day, principals are still allowed to create parameters specific to their school. That will prevent disruptions. And some principals will allow cell phones and electronic devices as students wait in the gym. Some will not. And it's going to be up to the school prior to the school day or after the school day while they're still in their supervision. So that autonomy and flexibility still exists for principals. So that is the elementary school. During the instructional day from 7:45 to 2:15 p.m., the phones should not be out for elementary and middle school. And then middle school obviously is 8:30 to 3:15 p.m. For high schools, the same rules apply except for changing classes and at lunch, okay? So again, the default is no electronic devices during the instructional day, but for lunch and changing classes, electronic devices can be used, but if there's an issue with that use, the principal can modify it. They still have the autonomy to modify if there's a disruption or a valid reason to change that use and flexibility of that use for students. Okay, so that's at the high school level. Obviously, a high school level instructional day is 8:45 a.m. to 3:45 p.m. Fine Arts Center, Roper Mountain Science Center, based upon their uniqueness and their schedule, can develop their own rules consistent with elementary and, consistent with high schools and career centers. All right, so again, elementary and middle lumped together, and nothing during the school day, instructional day. High school, nothing during the school day for its use except for lunch and changing classes. All right, and I've mentioned this, but I'll say it again. Before and after school, principals still have the autonomy to develop school-specific parameters for the use of electronic devices. Okay, designed to enhance the school environment, prevent disruptions. It's going to be based specific on that school. Discipline of students. That is all within the behavior code, JCDA, the policy that you have for as refusal to obey and other measures for as the actual discipline of students for violating these parameters. And so that there's no change in that. Staff training with regard to this administrative rule, the policy JCDA, confiscation and possible searches. We already have training. We are going to continue to enhance that training for administrators to know when they can confiscate a phone, when they can possibly ask for consent to search a phone, all kinds of do's and don'ts, parameters, Fourth Amendment analysis, things of that nature. That's very nuanced, very complicated under the law, but that we provide training on. And so that is also contained in the administrative rule at the very end of what we have developed. And that provides the summary of the administrative rule. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much for this. Ms. LaVentus Wells?
Mr. Webb, I really have a problem with giving autonomy to principals and we not being consistent throughout this district on phone usages, because that's what we do with discipline or dress code. And that's why some of the dress code situations or the dress or what students are wearing to schools, some schools, are inappropriate. Let me rephrase that, are not consistent throughout the district. And so then, therefore, you've got students that want to go to a certain high school because they can wear whatever they want. And they can wear their skirts up to wherever they want to wear them, and high heels and so forth, and nothing happens. So when we are not consistent on policy and give autonomy to principals, I'm concerned. So I am not in favor of the inconsistency, leaving it up to principals.
So I want to be clear that during the school day, the instructional day, consistency across the board, okay? There's a little bit of autonomy before and after school while they're still on campus, students are still on campus, for principals to develop parameters that best suits their school and their communities and their students. I don't view it as similar to the dress code, because obviously the dress code is going to apply across the entire day, and we're talking about a finite period of time. A lot of times it's going to be 10, 15 minutes when a student gets to school before the instructional day starts, that perhaps they might have the ability to use their phone. In talking with principals and school leaders, many principals said that is beneficial. The ability for students to use their phones at the beginning of the school day, for when they arrive prior to the instructional day starting, is beneficial to prevent disruptions, that it actually gets them occupied doing something for that time period, and is beneficial for that school. But again, some schools will not allow it. And so we believe that it strikes the right balance between consistency across the board during the instructional day, but for a finite time period before and after school, for there to be some small amount of autonomy to schools and principals based on their communities.
But not during lunch.
For high school, that is correct.
Not during lunch.
Well, clarify your question. Elementary and middle school, cell phones are not out at lunch.
That's good.
High schools, unless there's an issue and the principal restricts it, then cell phones and devices can be out during lunch.
Okay, that's where I have a problem. I don't have a problem before and after school, but I do have a concern during school, all hours during school, unless special permission is given because of a special situation, a home situation. But other than that, not during lunch. Thank you.
I think one thing that has to be considered in all of this, at the elementary level, students basically are with their teacher all day. Their teacher takes them from one place to another, including lunch, directly supervised by a teacher. At the middle school level, there is a little more freedom, but generally in our middle schools, they move as groups at one time, sometimes the grade levels separately. They're more heavily supervised. At high school, the bell rings, changing classes. They go out in the hall. There will be teachers in the hall. At lunchtime, depending on whether they have 2 lunches or 3 lunches, you can have as many as 800 to 1,000 students in commons areas, in the cafeteria. And we need to think about, as we have thought about in this process, how do you enforce a ban on high school level students with the number of teachers that we would have available to supervise those same students? Because that supervision can't be done by even in our big schools, if they have 7 assistant principals, they cannot adequately supervise the number of students that are out at lunchtime, not under the direct supervision of teachers. They would dramatically have to ramp up the number of teachers that they have on supervision at lunch. And when we looked at that, what's the return on that investment of taking even more of our teachers' time? And how effectively could they even manage that number of students when you basically can sit there with your hand in your pocket and text on a phone just like that, because you can watch younger people do it all the time. They can walk down the hall and have that earbud in and be talking away, and you never see a phone. So one of the considerations in all this is how effectively and who will monitor and supervise and enforce the rule. Pretty easily done at elementary, a little more challenging at middle school, but the most challenging at high school, given the size of our schools, as far as the square footage, the number of students that you put in motion at any one time, and the availability of personnel to monitor those students. Then you balance that off with what will you be gaining by prohibiting the use of that phone during that time, and how effectively will you really be in banning it. Pretty effective inside the classroom. It's pretty apparent they have it. In fact, I think most of our high schools, since they implemented this, in a lot of them, they've required them to put them in their book bag and put them up against the wall. So they're not even in physical proximity to them. So we weighed all those things very carefully before we went to a much more restrictive rule.
Well, I think if you start the school year off properly and you enforce this regulation, then I think it is a preventative measurement when it calls to fights or et cetera at lunchtime and setting up things to do after school. So I'm sorry. That's the law enforcement in me, and I would rather be, I'm not saying teachers have to patrol everything, but at least you have it on record that this is a policy. Policy was broke, the fights broke out, and it's because of cell phone usage or whatever else is involved. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Middleton.
Thank you. So this is one of my things. And I've actually took the time prior to this cow to do my own research and look at what was happening in other school districts. And they've actually pulled cell phones completely in Florida. I went and talked to the chair of Rock Hill. And one of the reasons why they stopped there, why they put a very restrictive policy in place, is really because the sheriff complained about cell phones because kids were video recording fights, and then after school they were doing various things was happening. So my first question is, what does, and what is the input that we get from our resource officers or our security team in the school system here?
Sure, and they're a great partner with us. I mean, I can tell you in my first life, I don't know if you know, but I was a prosecutor. And so, you know,
You were a good one.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's right. My first life of practicing law. Yeah, hopefully I have 9 lives. We'll see. You know, I have spoken about this rule with several of our folks that work with us in law enforcement. And they realize it's a balancing act, as Dr. Royster outlined, and so do principals. I mean, they're the ones on the grounds, assistant principals, dealing with discipline, dealing with these issues. Yet the overwhelming feedback and input we receive from schools that for lunch, for example, is that those should be permitted. Now, if at a particular school, there is a pattern of issues, and it is something that needs to be modified, principals will still have that option to restrict it at lunch or allow it for a certain period of time at lunch. So I think that's important to note.
We don't have any established pattern, as was referenced in Rock Hill. We have no established pattern of that at this point. What we do have is a pattern of things having happened in the community and being communicated out in the community after school hours, and that spilling over into school. But to Doug's point, we find that to be a problem within the school day. The way that rule's written can tighten up there for that purpose. I firmly believe, having done this for a lot of years, and haven't been in a school for a lot of years, might have been a few years ago, but there are a lot of things about discipline that haven't changed. The worst rule you can have is one you can't enforce, because it sends the wrong message. And it would require, in our analysis of this, it would require such a level of supervision to implement an enforcement of an all-out ban at the high school level that would far outweigh any good that we would gain from that, because we really can't track back and say to you, we had 45 incidents that occurred as the direct result of a student possessing and utilizing a cell phone during the school day. Now, we certainly can track those things moving forward. If there's a need to adjust it on a school level basis or even a district level basis, we could make that, but we still need to make that decision, keeping in mind, is this really a rule that we can enforce? And if it is it a rule that we should expend this much time and effort to enforce, given what benefit we might gain from it? I believe there's tremendous benefit to be gained from prohibiting it inside the classroom. Tremendous benefit. And much easier to enforce. There's still an additional responsibility for that classroom teacher, but one that will help them in administering the operation of their class. So those were the things that we considered in coming forward with what we've come forward with.
I think this is yesterday morning, I got up really early, I think at 5 or 5:30, because it was really bothering me, the cell phone thing. And I looked at the board docs and I read what you wrote about the capability of the phones to take pictures, to record. That is the most dangerous thing. If kids can take pictures They can airdrop it to tons of kids. They can shame kids. They can embarrass. They can bully. They can cheat. Those video capabilities are really, really problematic. And I know in there is also smartwatches, which I'm not as concerned about because I don't really think you can photograph and record too well in smartwatches, and it's even a little hard to text, but I don't know how you control those, but I'm glad it's in there. So I think this is a great improvement. It's definitely a step in the right direction. If it was up to me, I would ban them 100%. But I'm also a realist. And I also feel that these comments I hear about people want to be in touch with kids in case there's an emergency, oh my gosh. To me, that would create more confusion and safety concerns than any other thing. With a bunch of kids pulling out cell phones and texting to other kids in other schools or all over the place saying, we have this report or we have a problem here, and parents running. To me, that would be, I'm sure if you talk to any law enforcement, they'd probably say, this is not really helpful. But I also understand parents are concerned. I know I would be frantic. So the other thing I want to bring up is I would like to see students become, and adults too, become more responsible with their cell phone usage. And this could be a teachable moment here when you set out this policy that principals can talk to kids more about, hey, just because you're out of your class, that is not your moment to everyone grab their cell phones because you're allowed. You shouldn't really be looking at your cell phones when you're passing. There should really be a reason to look at that cell phone. Like maybe you're getting a text or something from your mother to pick up a sibling at school or whatever, or you're meeting someone after school to go to practices. Those are things that's when you take out your cell phone. It shouldn't be just everyone take out their cell phones. And I also believe kids are not getting good socialization skills because they're not going to they go to the cafeteria and everyone's texting. They're not even talking to each other. So these are things that all people, I feel, need to learn. Better citizenship. How do we use cell phones in a productive and responsible way? And kids should not just be on them and not talking to other people. You know, not like just not even enjoying their lunch or enjoying their passing time. And they should just be getting to class because they're so busy on silly cell phone conversations. So that's my opinion. And I know it's probably not everyone's opinion, but it really bothers me. They are a huge distraction, but I think you've done a great job. And I was the one that had called and made some changes. It was me, like to make sure they're silenced. I would love to see them put up somewhere in a cubby and not used again during the day, but I know it's probably not realistic. We do have to enforce these things. The other thing, I also think that principals and coaches, they should really look at when they're in practices, football practice, basketball practice, tennis practice, they should also be encouraged to have students put away their cell phones. Even though it's after school, even though our band practice or whatever it is, kids need to focus on what the teacher or the coach or whoever, band director, is telling them to do and not be instead texting if it's not important. I don't know how you put that in. You'd probably be very hard to enforce, but those are my ideas on it. But I do kind of echo a little bit what Linda is saying, that I hope that the principals are very clear and try to be very consistent, because when we have a patchwork of, you know, that's what we had before. Some teachers let cell phones be used in their class, some didn't. Kids would sneak them. I mean, the places they can sneak them and hide them is amazing, you know, and they would be using them, and because this teacher said they could do it, or this principal maybe doesn't really mind too much, or this assistant principal doesn't mind. And then you have that patchwork, and then before you know it, So maybe something that we could a principal move to, if this is not working, can we restrict more? That's my question.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Let me emphasize and be clear that if at a particular school there are a lot of commotion, a pattern of issues, of concerns at lunch, changing of class, this rule still gives that flexibility to the principal to modify and restrict further. Absolutely.
Thank you. And another thing I have is that a lot of parents say, well, I have to get in touch with my kid, but why can't they email them on the Chromebooks? Right? I mean, isn't that a possibility? So anyways, sorry. That's my issues. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. Ms. Goodwin Caldwell?
Thank you for making this rule. I have a couple of questions. Because I know when I was in the school system, the way that we would confiscate the cell phones at that time, it wasn't a whole lot of them, but we had something in place where that we would contact the parent and have the parent to pick up the phones after. Do we have anything in here about confiscation of the phones once they are in violation?
So we have a reference to the training as it pertains to confiscation. Now, I will tell you that for its confiscation, it should really be done at the administrator level if it needs to be done. A lot of times, law enforcement could be involved because we are talking about something that might be criminal conduct potentially for its confiscation. But what the training really emphasizes is consent. Talking to the student, show me your phone, show me this issue, those kinds of things without confiscating the phone. But to be clear, we are no longer in the retention business of cell phones. All right, so we no longer want them. Now, there will be times that we might have to confiscate them, but that it should be limited, and the parent would be contacted that day, and that's all part of the training that we give to schools.
Okay, so that is in the rule.
That's a reference in the training, yes, ma'am. Yes.
It's referenced in the training, but not in the rule.
It does not go into detail for as the exact parameters for confiscation.
Because I'm sure that the parents will want to know, if the phone is taken, they would want to know.
That's right, and
what
they are
rule is in
contacted.
place on how to get it back, because they get really upset about those expensive phones that they buy these kids.
I agree. They are contacted that day.
Okay, all right. Did we, after Ms. Middleton said that about extracurricular, did we address extracurricular on campus on the use of phones?
So that would largely
Is that addressed?
So that would largely fall within the language in the administrative rule talking about before and after the instructional day. That allows schools to create their own parameters. In talking with principals for as extracurricular activities, if someone's playing basketball or band or things of that nature, they shouldn't be able to get on their phone. They should be busy in that activity. Now, there could be an opportunity for them during a break or something to text, but that would be really left up to the principal and or coach of that particular activity, sport, other activity, things of that nature. So, the feedback from schools is give us a little bit of autonomy with regard to that, and I think this strikes that balance.
If we have coaches or band directors that are allowing athletes or students engaged in band or chorus or anything else for that matter, ROTC, if they're letting them be on their phone when they actually or should be actively engaged in practice, they're going to have other problems and they're not going to last long. No quality coach or director is going to allow that. Now, if you're working with a group over here and you've sent a group over there and said, I'm going to get to you in a few minutes, maybe let them do it then. But generally speaking, you're going to want them watching what you're doing. So they're going to have other issues that will need to be addressed. I'm trying to think of a better way to say this. No good coach, director, or sponsor is going to allow that to take place when they're trying to coach or teach or direct.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Doolin. I'm done.
Ms. Mosley?
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. I, for one, am very happy to see this administrative rule. Anecdotally, I've sat in on PTA meetings at our school, our high school. I have high schooler still, and she doesn't love the policy, but I think it's great. The reports I heard at the beginning of the year were students were more engaged in class. From a parent standpoint, the parents, my social circle, a lot less drama being texted to the mama. So that's a big, I mean, it's a big deal. I'm going to be the devil's advocate on not allowing during lunch, okay? Because I know firsthand that we have students who attend the schools who go to lunch with none of their friends. There's 3 periods at my child's school. Took 3 years before she had lunches with her peers, her friends, I should say. And so during lunch, just from a mental health standpoint, sometimes her phone was her opportunity to listen to music, check her email, whatever she wanted to do. And I'm sorry, I don't feel like at the high school level that it's necessary to police them in that fashion. I'm not suggesting that the things that you're concerned about don't happen, because they do. But as far as athletics go, I had a wrestler. Trust me, my son was far more afraid of his coach than he ever was of me. And there were no cell phones ever, because especially in the physical sports, I don't even think that the athletes are carrying them out on the fields. I mean, I'll be honest. If they are, that's on the coach. But I just don't hear the report of problems in an extracurricular that I do in the classrooms. And I think that's the bigger issue that this rule addresses, especially at the high school level. I don't know why elementary schools and children need phones, frankly. My children went through a middle school that had an absolute no tolerance policy for cell phones, a charter school, and it was never a problem. So I fully support at those levels the restrictions that we have. High schools, I think it's reasonable. And I just had one question having to do with, and maybe Ms. Middleton touched on this with the watches. Like, there's obviously, I don't have an Apple Watch, but I know folks do. I mean, I guess maybe this is a bigger question for teachers. We have this rule, we have principals that we're saying to enforce it, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's up to the classroom teacher as to the degree to what they want to enforce. For example, at a high school level, you've got a block schedule, 90 minutes of a day. Teachers are not, they don't lecture for 90 minutes, and a lot of times students finish work that they're given in class before the bell rings. Would it be up to the teacher to have a discretion to say, if you're completely done in the classroom, would you be allowed to use, if the teacher was saying it's okay to use it? Does that make sense? Because high schools, I mean, they have the longest periods. And I just know that's it's a realistic situation, because
If your question, if I understood your question correctly, you're asking, would the teacher, under this current proposal and the conversations we've had, would the teacher have autonomy to allow students to use the phone in the 90 minutes that is not instructional in nature?
Right.
They would not have that choice.
Okay, so like if a student, so it's test day in US history, teacher gives the test, it's 90-minute period, but a students finish it in 45 minutes. I mean, because a lot of times the tests don't take that long. What do they do? I mean, and the teacher doesn't have instruction plan for the rest of the time because it's test day. It's a unit test, for example. Yeah. What are they? We're saying that teachers don't have that discretion?
Not under this rule, nor as we have implemented since the beginning of school. And I don't think it's created any issue, to my knowledge. Mr. Reimer would be more familiar with that than I would. So we're half a school year into this already, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's been, and I certainly understand your question. I would hope the teacher would then have some additional items that students could work on to improve their grade in the class, or the student could work on work in another class. We want the 90 minutes to be all instruction. And that's why we believed, and I think the principals believed, that the class changes, the lunches, as you mentioned, at that age would be appropriate for them to take the break, mental break from the academic piece to get on their phones. The only scenario from which we discussed, Ms. Mosley, where it would be appropriate, and it would be very rare for a cell phone to be used inside the 90-minute block, would be if the student didn't have their Chromebook, if there wasn't a backup Chromebook, or if the battery was dead, and there was something that the teacher felt the student needed to be able to access, either in their Google Classroom or online, and couldn't be done offline, for lack of a better word, that the teacher could give individual permission at that moment. But that's still instructional in nature and not for their own personal use.
Okay, so are you saying that we've been implementing this rule all along this year, and now we're just making it official? Is that?
Most all schools, all 15 high schools, reform, if they did not have a cell phone policy similar to what is proposed here, they had begun to move to that.
Yeah.
All 15 did. So right now, there should be no student personally using a cell phone in a class. Now, do I believe that that's happening with 100% assurance every class in every school? I wouldn't say that. But because schools still allowed, before this rule, some teacher autonomy,
yeah,
which is what you're referring to. What this would change would be to, in essence, eliminate that teacher autonomy for non-instructional use of the cell phone during the 90 minutes.
Okay, so are we setting teachers up to have that battle of where they're having to all of a sudden, because right now teacher autonomy is happening. I mean, I'm just going to say, at least at my child's school.
Well, it's happening in some schools. It's not happening in all schools.
Okay.
Some of them have had a more restrictive rule in place. This moves all of them to
It
the more
depends, I
restrictive.
mean, teacher to teacher depends on how restrictive within that classroom it is.
Well,
and I'm not saying that I disagree with or agree with that. I'm just saying that's what I've seen. So I guess I'm just wondering if we're making it more restrictive across the board. Again, I'm not saying I'm for or against it. I'm fairly supportive. I just want to make sure we're not creating more discipline.
I guess in practicality, this rule, administrative rule, wouldn't go into effect till second semester. So
that's correct.
Unless you're a career center teacher, which is probably less of an issue there anyway. You got a whole new group coming to you January whatever date it is, the 3rd.
Right.
So now you got a new, you might have had that teacher before, but all right, it's a new semester, new class, new set of rules.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be much of an issue, and it truly hadn't been much of an issue at the high schools.
And this is
from what we've been able to determine.
It has been much better. The teachers have appreciated it because I think the teachers were caught many times in that wash of they want their students to like them, for lack of a better word, and so they don't want to be the bad guy or gal about that. And to Dr. Royster's point, when we worked with Mr. Webb on it, we were very intentional about waiting until the start of the second semester for the very reason that he said it gives communication opportunities for the principals to call home and explain all this, but it also allows those teachers from the first day of the second semester with a new group of students to set the new parameters and expectations, which again, at most schools, all schools, it's not that much of a leap from where we are currently. The autonomy piece is the leap at some schools, not all.
Okay. Well, as a whole, I think you've struck a good balance here, and I'm very glad that we are where we are. So that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. I have a couple of things. One, how exactly are the teachers going to, what is the retaliation? So you see a child pull out a phone in the classroom. What happens at that point? Technically, I mean, are they going to send them to the office? Are they going to take away the phone? Is it kind of up in the air right now?
Yeah, and certainly others can weigh in on this. My view is this, it's clear classroom expectations. It's as if I were growing up, I brought a Sports Illustrated to class and I got it out when I shouldn't have been getting it out. They would typically warn me, right? And then if I did it again, most likely would be a referral or something of that nature, some discipline, for refusal to obey in accordance with your behavior code. So, I think there is the opportunity for a warning as a reminder, Johnny, please put that phone device, whatever, away. And then from there, move forward.
Do you think it would be advantageous to kind of give some sort of guidelines as to what should happen?
Yeah, we can certainly do that, but I think to Doug's point, to make it maybe a little more specific, what you want is a teacher to say, look, you're not supposed to have that out, put it up. Now, most students are going to put it up. Now, there's always somebody, Doug might not have put that Sports Illustrated up first time he was told, but there's always going to be somebody that won't. All right, now it's not about the phone. It's about you didn't do what I told you to do. Now we're moving to the next level. One thing we do not want any teacher taking a phone from anybody. That creates a flashpoint that does not need to exist in a classroom.
That was where I was headed.
That's a difficult enough matter to navigate as an assistant principal or a principal. And confiscating those devices, you can look throughout this state and in our country. Taking something like that has often led to far more serious issues occurring than should ever have occurred.
Right.
Because it creates this confrontation over something that shouldn't happen. One, doesn't need to happen in the classroom in front of a whole bunch of other people. So you get them out, let the assistant principal deal with them. So in my mind, you tell somebody once, and then after that, you suffer the consequence for whatever that might be, which might be detention or calling your parents or whatever. That we have said to every school, you need to have a graduated approach to discipline, and we have left to a degree that to their autonomy to, all right, if this happens the first time, this is what happens to you the second time. We are also working towards a more uniform implementation of those across the district. You'll hear a little bit about that in a few minutes, but we're not quite there yet. And some of that we don't want to do, to the point made earlier. We don't want to do that stuff in the middle of a year. We want to do that stuff at the beginning of a year. This one, not that big a change from what most of them are already doing. It being high school, they're pretty much all going to a different place in January anyway. Like any other routine rule, you'd like to think that everybody handles it exactly the same way. But as you all know, we're talking about 6,000 teachers. So you could figure within that 6,000, about 2,000 of them are high school teachers. They're the ones that probably going to have a little more issue with dealing with this. Middle and elementary schools, it's pretty much been this way for a while. But you're still dependent on 6,000 different people enforcing this because it's inside the walls of their classroom. And that's always a challenge. Because for some people, it's more, I think you all appreciate this, certain things bother some people more than they bother others. And that, unfortunately, may tend to bleed over in how they address things. Our ability to make that consistent is not so much in saying it should be consistent, it's the ability to supervise that consistency. How many administrators do we have? I believe it's 300 and something. Principals, assistants, and administrators across all levels. They're the ones providing supervision for those 6,000 teachers. So we have to always keep in mind, we want people to do what they're supposed to do. We want them to act consistently. But realizing there are all these differences between people, and everything we decide, we want it done this way, We got to be able to put people towards ensuring that it gets done this way. So that's why one reason we may take more moderate steps than some people might wish that we would take over issues that may not be quite as serious as some others. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Now, going to the elementary and the middle schools, I know that it is said that there's not really a problem. I have a friend whose child is in 3rd grade, and there is a student in this classroom who continually gets their phone out and records this little girl and puts it on social media and bullies her. The mother has gone to the teacher, who is actually a long-term substitute, who is not doing anything about it right now. She has spoken to the principal twice, and now the principal has not really done anything about this student either. I have suggested going to the ombudsman, which she says that she is going to do, but my question is, now this elementary school student is being recorded. What kind of, how do we stop that when the teacher's in the classroom allowing that to happen, you know?
If you'll, not in here but offline,
Yes.
let us know where,
Yep.
what classroom,
Okay.
we'll take care of it.
Yep.
That cannot be tolerated.
Right, and that's what I've told her, and it's been going on for quite a while, and I didn't want to get involved, which is why I'm not saying when and where it is. Secondly, TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat all have school-focused fight pages, and there are kids that specifically go in the bathroom and film fights at all of our schools. Is there anything that we can do to take these kind of pages down? I mean, I know one saying you can't have your phone in school and recording. There's no one in the bathroom policing to be sure that these things aren't happening. Is there any way to, I guess, what can we do?
In that case, we can address, particularly now with changing this policy or changing this practice, we can address after the fact the kid that does the filming.
Sure.
Taking the stuff down.
Can't do anything, can we?
No.
Okay.
We have some limited success with some of those entities taking things down, but generally that's not fighting.
Right.
But we do have some success with getting them to take it down, but it's usually a fairly lengthy and convoluted process to get them to do anything. They're motivated by more people being on their platform. They're not really motivated by doing what's right.
Right.
Or what's in the best interest of underage children.
Right. So I assume if, especially these middle and high schoolers are not allowed to have their phones out other than lunchtime and that sort of thing, they shouldn't necessarily have it in the bathroom with them, but you know, if it's in their pocket, it could possibly be there.
About the only way to prevent that, and it's not an effective way, is to prohibit them from having it at all. And there's really no way to affect, even if you all passed a policy, not us just doing an administrative rule, it would be next to impossible to enforce it until they did something. Then you're simply chasing it after the fact.
Now, I will say this from my perspective. Again, I don't have data, concrete data to support this, but I will tell you that schools, especially in the high school setting, have monitored and put technology in place. I forget the app and things of that nature, but basically being proactive for is monitoring who's going to the bathroom, when, who's allowed, those kinds of things. And I will tell you from my perspective, what I've had to deal with, and I used to have to deal with a lot of bathroom, issues, that has improved as far as the frequency and number.
What Doug's talking about is the Halo devices, because they will do things other than monitor vape.
And also Hall Pass, the app.
The Hall Pass app to track who's where. So those two things together have helped to cut down on those things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate this, and I think that this is great. I'm all for zero cell phone usage at all time. So I know we can't do that, but this is great. Thank you.
Mrs. Bush?
Boy,
Sorry. Without objection, can we extend for 10 minutes? Thank you.
Well, we've come a long way, baby. This is, I think every time just the general concept is we're always going to have to come back and adapt and update. I think this is, for its most part, a great update. You said that, I do have some questions about, you said that we've been going under these rules since the beginning of this year in middle, high, and elementary school.
Elementary and middle have done this for, how many years, David, at middle?
Middle schools have done this for 2 years now.
Okay.
Each
They decided
implementing
to do
their
that.
own rule. Elementary, Narissa, Brenda, elementary, how long? No cell phone in the classroom. So for a number of years. Most of the high schools all out without the teacher being able to tell them they could use them. Most of the high schools since the beginning of the year, and for all of them, you got to keep it put up unless the teacher said you could. That's the minority within the 15 high schools.
That's right.
I think I got all that straight.
So I've heard issues more in elementary school than I have in high school. So apparently, we just need to make it, and maybe this will be a good time by updating this, that we can make sure that incidences like what's happened, obviously in another class, and elementary students, and it might be just the sheer fact that this is supposed to have been the rule for a few years now, that either new teachers or either, for some reason, I'm hearing more pertaining to students, particularly 4th and 5th grade, having cell phones and maybe using them how they should not be using them, because parents have obviously, because when I hear that a 5th grader, and I'm like, I'm just interested in why. And it's generally because Big Brother picks them up and he might be late from ball practice today, or grandparents are going to pick you up, or go ahead and take the bus, or those kind of issues. But they're quick learners at that age. And so there's, it might be a good time to say, this is the rule. And also, I was glad to see in there, because I know now that there are so many medical apps on there, and especially the one that reads their blood sugar, that a lot of our students are very dependent on having that cell phone with them so that they can keep that constant watch. So I just hope we don't perceive that that kids are saying, well, why do they have why can they have their cell phone out? Well, now I'll go get a doctor's excuse so that I can have mine. And also, what about the smartwatches and the earbuds? I mean, so is it just that, because a teacher cannot obviously walk around and look at a watch to see if it is a smart watch. So I guess it would have to be just her observing the student using that.
That's right.
Using that.
You can't tell how you got a watch on.
That's right.
Yeah, I didn't know if we were just saying simply don't. I mean, you can't prohibit them from wearing it because it does more than.
That's right. I mean, in a perfect world, we would be able to say no, yes, and it'd be very clear. But to your point, we're going to have to navigate with the times, navigate with the situation. And some of these situations, like smartwatches, you're just going to have to look to see if the student's using it.
Okay, well, thank you. I think I like more the fact that the teachers do not have the autonomy, because as I would visit schools and you would go and, some schools that each classroom, they would either have the cell phone
the little thing through the cell phone on the door, that the teacher allowed it or didn't allow it, because the students were, you know, gosh, am I in a classroom where I can take my phone out if I'm finished with my work? Or does this teacher not allow me to say? And so I like that it's before school, during lunchtime, because I think that gives especially a parent plenty of time to be able to make those changes that you do as a parent about don't ride the bus, your sister's going to pick you up. You can do that at lunch, and you can do that, obviously, you know, the elementary student, as they're sitting there in the gym and maybe a change has occurred, that the parent can say, I'm running a few minutes late, don't panic, but I'll be there to pick you up. So yeah, I talked to one parent that there's some kind of device now that they have for their elementary student, and it is a watch, but it only allows, it's like a training wheel smartwatch.
Yeah.
It only allows mom, dad, and grandma.
We have, you know, for my family, I have 3 kids, high school, middle school, and elementary, and my middle school child has something similar to that.
They can only, it's contact with mom and dad and grandparents. So yes, we are evolving quickly into, I think, as much concern as we have for a policy to address all this is that the concern for where do we put in our instructional day, just teaching kids how to be responsible cell phone users, social media users, because we're just depending that parents or somebody's doing that out there. And obviously, as our society evolves, there is no one that has told someone that when I'm interviewing a young person for a job, they should not be on their cell phone texting while they're doing a job interview. But obviously, somebody's not telling these kids that, because I say, excuse me, I'll just wait until you're finished with your social media account, and then we'll talk about whether I'm going to employ you or not. So there's obviously some opening. I don't know if it's in like freshman year, that freshman training or something, that we have to take ownership and just the basics of cell phone and social media use. That so thank you very much. That's all.
Okay. Ms. LaVentus Wells.
So I know that this is just a modified policy, JCDA, but I would like for the minutes to reflect that I'm totally against allowing cell phones in the high schools during lunch and whenever. I think there needs to be consistency through all elementary, middle, and high school. I have seen too many fights that started in the gyms and et cetera that are posted on social media, and it all stemmed from texting and stirring things up, and this is going to break out in the gym, or this is going to break out in the lunchroom, or this is going to break out on the field, or whatever the situation is. So with that being said, please put that I'm against. I want consistency throughout elementary, middle, and high school, and not leaving it up to principals. Thank you.
And just to clarify, I think this is what you intended. This is administrative rule development. Right. We're not modifying policy, but just to be clear.
Okay, thank you, Ms. LaVentus Wells. Ms. Middleton.
So is there any way to, I think you already do this, block some of these internet sites and things like that? Is that already done in the school?
That's right. That is correct. Anything harmful, obscene to students is federal law that we are required to do.
So I guess you can't block things like TikTok and all that, right?
Yeah, I would have to ask Bill Brown exactly.
Yes, we do block it on our systems.
Yes.
We cannot block things on a phone. Now, there's a practical side to this too. One, it would also be against federal law to block cell phone signals. We can't do that. Now, because of the construction of our buildings, there are many places in our buildings that you cannot get a cell phone signal unless you use our Wi-Fi. If you use our Wi-Fi, it has the same blocks in it that you would have if you used a Chromebook or laptop or any kind of computer on our system.
But then it would be blocked.
So then it would be blocked. But if you get near an outside wall, then you can pick up an outside cell phone signal, which would allow you to go wherever your cell phone would allow you to go. But the bigger the school, the more concrete in the building, the less ability there is for that signal to penetrate inside the building away from an exterior wall.
That's pretty good then. Wouldn't it be funny if when the kids tried to access things on their cell phones, they got a teacher like teaching algebra and they had to watch that the whole time and they couldn't see anything on the internet? Okay. So the other thing I would like to see, I guess, when they get these rules very formally in place is, you know, maybe there could be like more signs up in the school and more outreach to parents and just more understanding just in the community as a whole. This is what we do. We don't have cell phones. Generally, we should really discourage cell phones even during passing and cafeteria. I mean, I understand that sometimes you could be sitting around and be kind of lonely or whatever, but I don't think we should ever encourage cell phones because I do think it does prevent kids from interacting or trying to interact and just learn how to do that as they grow up. You know, they're just sort of on their cell phones, so they're missing opportunities to interact, even no matter what the circumstances are. So I don't know if the teachers do signs like, hey, no cell phones, and the word gets out, and I think that would make a difference too.
Yeah, as we mentioned, I think there certainly is an opportunity for us to enhance our training, our communication with staff, students, and, you know, as Dr. Royster said, second semester, certainly this will all be in place.
And I have actually read through my research and heard that when they stop the cell phones, the kids are like, don't tell anybody, but we really like it. It's great. That's all. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, perfect timing because we're out of time. Thank you so much for this,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Webb. Thank you for developing this rule. I like it also. The next item on our agenda is item 4.02, which is about discipline and dress code consistency. Dr. Royster, did you want to speak to this?
Just briefly, Ms. Dillon, thank you. For some time now, our district level leadership has been working with school administrators to develop more consistent practices for dress code and for minor disciplinary infractions, so there's greater consistency throughout the system. We want to make sure that we're always balancing. There is a need and a desire for there to be autonomy in certain areas for certain schools to reflect the values and the issues in their community. On the other hand, we also want to maintain a degree of consistency. So if, for example, you have children in your family in multiple schools, that generally speaking, all those rules and consequences for violating those rules are reasonably the same, at least across levels. So Dr. Ward has spearheaded an effort along with Dr. McDonald and Mr. Reimer to look at consistency of dress code and minor disciplinary infractions such as tardies and ID violations and those kinds of things. So, Dr. Ward?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Royster, and good morning, everyone. Just want to take time to share with you the process that we went through and pretty much just finished up with this consistency and discipline dress code for middle and high schools. Of course, the issue at hand was that practices differed from school to school, and as it involved incidents with tardies, ID violations, class cutting, and dress code infractions. These would be considered minor infractions in the initial stages. And in the beginning, schools did have some flexibility, which allowed them to address their specific communities. But it also led to some confusion within and concerns for parents and students. So the objective in the process is to increase alignment for discipline and dress code practices and also to provide more consistency and clarity for parents and students at the middle and high school levels. So just the next two slides are just kind of policy JCDA addressing dress code. As you can see, some of the statements within the policy already addressed. Clothing and or hair should not be inappropriate to the school setting. Items like wearing accessories or clothing that could pose a safety threat to oneself or to others is not allowed. Hats and sunglasses shouldn't be worn in the building, and all attire must not evidence membership in or affiliation with gangs. Also, proper shoes should be worn at all times, and attire must not be immodest, obscene, profane, or lewd. Clothing that inappropriately exposes body parts is not permitted as well. And undergarments should not be exposed. It talks about pants being worn at the natural waistline, and also talks about clothing or jewelry and things of that nature that display profanity, suggestive phrases, or advertise any suggestions of alcohol, tobacco, drugs, or sex is not allowed. So to start with, we took the middle school process. Dr. McDonald, Dr. Skipper, and myself met with a group of middle school administrators, a representative group of those administrators, to look at their current practices. The team, with this representative group from the middle school level, this was done at the end of last school year. We divided them into small groups to look at different categories to form recommendations. And those categories included, as mentioned earlier, tardies, IDs, class cutting, and dress code. So once we formed recommendations from these small groups, Dr. McDonald sent those out to the middle schools, and all principals at the middle schools had an opportunity to provide some input, and in the end, a consensus was met. So some of the practices that developed from this process, when we look at ID cards, at the beginning of the year, all students are provided one free ID, after which, if they need a temporary ID for a day, that first temporary ID will be provided free of charge to them. After that, they will charge a nominal fee for IDs, $1 for a temporary ID, and $5 to print a new ID. And all of these charges cover the cost of the materials to continue to print IDs throughout the year. After a third temporary ID that has to be printed, then there would be administrative consequence, and also possibly a mandatory new ID would have to be purchased at that time. So for tardies, this is the tardy policy that came out for middle schools. The first offense was a warning. Second offense was a parent contact. And third offense would be an assignment of a detention. And fourth offense would be a further referral to administration for more consequences. Tardies are kept by periods as students move back and forth. And anything cutting class would be pretty much an automatic referral to administration for an administrative consequence. So the high school process, we started the high school process in the summer, because at the end of the year, obviously, we wanted them to get through graduations and all of their closing out of school. So this was started, we met with all administrators from the high school at the June High School Summit. And in the June High School Summit, we, number one, we let them know what the process ahead we were looking for. Then we formulated a committee which was one representative, one administrative representative from each high school location was on the committee. And from there, we collected all of their current practices as it related to tardies, IDs, cutting class, and dress codes. From the policies that we collected, we established some common practices among the high schools. Then we acquired a consensus for the tardies, IDs, and class cutting. Dress code was, for the high school, was delayed till the school year began in order to give an opportunity for high school students and their inner high council to give some feedback and input on that dress code. And the reason that was done because previously they were allowed to have input on their previous dress code policies at high school. We also allowed some feedback from teacher forum groups as well once they began to meet at it. So the practices that come out of the high school for tardies, you see first through third, tardies consisted of a warning and conference with student and parent contact. Fourth and fifth tardies would be the assignment of detentions, and this could be after school, lunch, or Saturday detention based on how schools had it set up. Sixth and seventh, again, more detention or in-school suspension, again, and it could be by the period or it could be whole day in-school suspension. And then eighth on would be multiple days of either ISS or it could lead to out-of-school suspension. So tardies again would be, since high schools do period attendance, so tardies will be kept by period, and tardies could reset after quarter or after the semester when at the end of each semester they would switch classes anyway and start over. So for cutting class, first offense, detention or ISS. And second would be detention or ISS for multiple days, and then a third on be ISS or OSS. And again, cutting school or leaving campus would be elevated and for an administrative discipline. With the IDs for the high school, the first and second would include a warning with the students purchasing a new or temporary ID. Again, the first temporary ID is free. Then third through fourth would be a detention. And again, that could be ASD, lunch, or Saturday detention based on if the schools provide Saturday school or Saturday detention. And the fifth through sixth, is a detention or ISS, and with the students purchasing a new or temporary ID. And seventh on, again, ISS, OSS, with possible purchase of a new ID. Now, if a student comes to school without their ID and they have the money to purchase a new ID, then that would delete an infraction because they've purchased a new ID at that time. But if they need a temporary ID, then it counts against them as an infraction. All right, enforcement and supervision of these procedures, obviously they will be managed in a manner that keeps students in class as much as possible with as little disruption to their academic time. And schools will continue to monitor by checking for IDs as students enter the building. Most schools have a designated area for students to enter, and there's usually staff there to monitor students coming in. So they're checking for IDs and any other violations at that time. And also as students transition throughout the building from classes, the staff continuously checking for IDs. So dress code, we use for the high school process, we did use the same representative group that we used for the other minor infractions to pull their dress codes from each school, looking for common practices. And once we had those common practices and compared with what the middle school teams did, we shared those with the inter high council, and then we asked inter high council to take those back to their schools to get feedback from other students within the schools and also from administration. The next inter-high meeting, we met with them and shared the collective feedback that came from each school, and also allowed them an opportunity to have some discussion on dress code. And I would say some of them love their dress codes and some of them wanted a more relaxed dress code. But then, so we did, and we also sent, asked for feedback from Teacher Forum and asked them to go back to their schools and communicate with the rest of the staff and to form some consensus on their feedback on dress code. So some of the input from inter-high council, students generally, this is a summary for the most common answers to the questions. Basically, what do you like most about your dress code? What would you like to change about your dress code? They like being able to wear the athletic shorts. This was especially true from the girls. They like being able to wear holes in their pants above the knees. They like that you can't wear clothing depicting alcohol, drugs, gang affiliation, guns, or vulgar language. They wanted more lenient tank top and crop top rules. They also wanted more specific language in the dress code. Pretty much they wanted a more definitive language in the dress code to help them to, I guess, to make sure they were in compliance. And they did believe, on overall average, they believe that the dress code is not enforced equally and that girls are targeted more. From Teacher Forum, again, this is just a summary of the total, but teachers like the aspect of using fingertip length for or the mid thigh for shorts or bottoms, as they would say. They like no hats and hoodies in the building, especially no hoodies. They also like no pajamas or bedroom shoes to be worn at school, and using the width of your ID as a measure for shoulder straps. And they also would like to get rid of the leggings and the short shorts or skirts. Almost tongue twister. But they too wanted more clear language to define the dress code, and they wanted more consistency in enforcement of the dress code at school. So all the work combined, and these are the specifications that came out of that work for the schools. Utilizing the required length or hem lines for skirts or shorts or skirts would be used, would utilize the fingertip length to measure the hem lines for shorts. Also using the width of the ID for shoulder straps. No visible undergarments or items worn as undergarments. Holes in garments or exposed skin are prohibited above the required hem line or the fingertip length. No exposed midriff. Pajama pant bottoms are not allowed, and no bedroom shoes / slippers are allowed, and hoods, hats, and sunglasses must not be worn in the building at any time, Unless, of course, there's a fundraiser. We know that sometimes they allow hats for students to pay to wear a hat, but that's at the administrative on special occasions. Dress code violations. First offense is a warning and parent contact. Second offense, detention. And third offense is referral to administration for further consequences. Also noted that schools will have clothing items available to provide to students to wear if they are out of dress code compliance, or if there's a violation, then school can provide garments for them. any students who do not wish to take the school issued garments will be directed to call home to have appropriate garments brought, and we'll wait in a designated location until those garments are brought to school. And that is the summary of my presentation. Glad to answer any questions and have Dr. McDonald and Mr. Reimer here also to assist in questions.
Great, thank you. Ms. LaVentus Wells has a.
Thank you, Ms. Doolin. So this has been implemented this year?
The tardies, IDs, and class cutting has been implemented at all levels. Dress code at the middle school, because we waited for high schools to come in and get student input and teacher forum input. The dress code for the high schools will be implemented at the beginning of next year.
Okay, so that's a year late. I will tell you, going into some of these high schools, these students are dressed very inappropriately, and I know it's left up to the discretion of the principals. That's why I want policy in place, or for this to be updated, and I want consistency across the board. I do not want that in the hands of principals, because some principals don't care or enjoy it. I don't know which of the two, but I want it stopped. It's got to stop. And as far as, I figured you did it in the elementary schools, and I thought you probably said something to teachers, because when I walked into a couple of places, they said, "You're the reason why we can't wear this and this and this." And I went, "What?" Yes, the school board said we could no longer wear, I don't know, jeans or something, or tennis shoes or whatever it was. And I said, okay, I'm just going to tell you, I'm not sure about that, but I don't have a problem with tennis shoes. I want you to dress professionally, but you know.
Was that from the staff or?
From teachers at schools that, I wish I could say they were in my district, but they were not. They were outside of my area, but all of our schools are mine. So I will just say it was several elementary schools. It was elementary. But these students that come with these tank tops that are very healthy is inappropriate. I don't think tank tops is the way to go in high school. And I don't like the skirts. I think that's too much. But I look forward to you implementing a consistencies across the board with all high schools. And I know Ms. Mosley probably likes wearing bedroom slippers and pajamas when she drops her kids off at school. But I think she said that's not a problem for her, you know, but that's a problem for me. When we would go and watch the security systems implemented in some of the high schools, the kids wore pajamas and bedroom shoes. And I was like, what? But, you know, they felt comfortable. They wore a lot of different things. But I like consistency. And with that, I'm supposed to be at a funeral 45 minutes ago. So thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dick.
Thank you. Ms. Mosley.
Thank you, Sarah. Linda, I don't take my kids to school anymore, so not an issue. I don't have a problem with the bulk of this. I just have a question for clarity. With the IDs, are we saying that we're sending students to ISS after a certain number of violations, or if they can purchase a new ID on the spot, they don't have to go to that consequence?
And again, the enforcement piece is to hopefully manage this to keep kids in class as much as possible. Once they get to a certain number of IDs, even if they can't purchase one that day, they are allowed to charge. And we try not to let them build up too much on the charge piece, but over 7 or 8 violations, it becomes more of an insubordination thing at that point, so.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge that a little bit because I have a child that fell in that category because he has profound ADD and no executive function skills whatsoever. And when his junior year of high school, when he went to the Career Center first and had to change clothes to be in for safety reasons in a welding lab, and then had to come back to the high school at lunchtime, I will not embarrass myself and tell you how many ID charges he racked up that he had to pay me back for, but it was greater than what you list. And it's not he was not trying to get away with something or do something. It's genuinely just forgot to put it on or lost it somewhere between the locker room and wherever. And what I'm saying, I know that's not every student, and I realize that, but I do know that we were sending students to ISS for, I have an acquaintance son who had his ID on, he got cold, put his hoodie on top, so the ID, he just didn't pull the ID out, but it was like underneath, but they didn't see it, got sent to ISS for that kind of nonsense. And I say nonsense because I'm a firm believer of discipline, but I also think we need to I don't know, just have a little bit more common sense with this. And so I guess I just struggle with students being put out of classroom, out of instructional time for offenses like an ID. I don't have an issue for fighting or cutting class or things like that, although cutting class, it almost seems like giving them the consequence of ISS or detention, or not detention, suspension. They might enjoy that because they get out of what they don't want to be in anyway. But are we moving sort of somewhere where ISS can, I know we've talked about this in the strategic plan meeting. I guess I just really struggle when I see ISS written all over these discipline strategies.
Right now, it's the tool they have. We're seriously considering moving away from that. I believe it's highly ineffective. I think we could spend the same amount of money on after-school detention and Saturday detention, where students are giving up their time, not our instructional time.
Yes, I agree.
But we have a ways to go with that. There are some situations where we need to have places where students can go during the day that might otherwise go out of school suspension, but you can't get in touch with a parent, those kinds of things. My 10 years as a high school principal, I found in-school suspension to be highly ineffective, and in fact did away with it and converted those positions to monitoring detention after school Saturday and monitoring the building during the course of the day, all three of which proved to be far more effective than in-school suspension. Because you're simply taking the child out of class, they're missing instruction, and many times that's where they would rather be. Now, sometimes you'll get to a point, well, they don't show up for detention, then you have to suspend them because you've run out of options of what to do with them.
Okay, well, I'm really glad to hear that. I guess my point is I sat at a conference years and years and years ago about attention deficit issues, and I listened to someone say you can't discipline the ADD out of a kid, and I do believe that because I've lived with one. I'm not suggesting you don't have discipline. So my question is, if you have students that are chronically, I'll give you an example. A friend's child who was having the same challenge, his resource teacher was allowed to have an ID for him hanging in her classroom so that when he was walked in without his ID at one of our high schools, if he didn't have one on him or in his car or whatever, he could go straight to her classroom and get it. And it was sort of because he already saw her a point during the day. It was almost like an accommodation.
Yes, ma'am.
Is the best way I'm saying it.
Yes.
So I guess I'm just saying, are we still going to allow stuff like that?
Yes,
to
absolutely.
be okay? Because that is, I think there's a clear difference between defiance and insubordination and a condition a child can't help.
Yes, ma'am, I agree. I did the same when I was a principal
Yeah.
with a student that had issues with an ID. I would just have an extra one in my office waiting on them. And I would hope that our principals would do the same thing in those areas. And also a student, when you're in schools and students are walking down halls and they don't appear to have an ID, and a staff member asking them, where's your ID? And they pull it out their pocket. That doesn't count as a violation. They actually have it. I mean, it's a constant warning or a reminder to them to have it displayed. And again, it's for safety purposes to make sure.
That comes back to the point we discussed earlier. We want consistency in enforcement. At the same time, principals need to have autonomy to act in situations where that consistency may not be appropriate. You accomplish the same thing, you got the kid in the building with an ID, got a legitimate issue with why they can't seem to keep up with that. Now, the other part of that is we need to make sure that we are working with them to prepare them when they go out into the world of work where they may have to have an ID as well. So how are we doing that?
Like, are we okay? Was that all my time?
That happens this Tuesday of every month. And as you all will recall, we're meeting on a different Tuesday than we normally do. So this Tuesday, every month at noon, that goes off to test the alert system.
Well, it works.
And
so good. Yeah.
And one of the reasons we put that alert system is you cannot ignore it nor turn it off unless the phone is actually physically turned off.
Gotcha.
And it takes a while to answer it, particularly if your fingers don't move as fast as other people's.
Well, Dr. Royster, I think you hit on the head. I think just like the cell phone policy, I think, and to Ms. Leventis Wells' point, she's not here anymore, the consistency piece has been missing for me as I have people report different, like I know what I've experienced. I feel like my child's high school has handled it very reasonably, but the consistency piece, particularly where IDs are concerned, it just seems to vary a little bit more. And I would like to think that by putting more structure in place or more, maybe being more intentional with the communication about what our district policy is going to be helpful. So I appreciate that. I do appreciate the dress code changes. I think that everything on there is reasonable. I've struggled with the pajama pants, slippers. And I mean, I admit I've had a child go to school like that. It's not worth the battle some days, but I'm happy to see that in there, so. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Mrs. Mosley. Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
Thank you for this presentation. I have a couple of questions and comments. With the offenses to go to ISS, have we thought about revising those, Bert? Because some of these teachers send these kids out, and we should protect instructional time at all costs. And they send them out of their classrooms for minor offenses to ISS. And when they're in ISS, aren't they supposed to have work when they go to ISS?
Well, first thing is a teacher shouldn't be sending a student to ISS, only administrators should, because they're in essence removing them from classroom
That's not
instruction.
happening.
We need to know where that's not happening and we'll address it.
Okay. I
That's
talked
not
with you
within a
about it, 'cause-
teacher's authority to do that. By statute, only an administrator can suspend a student from class. Okay? Well, that doesn't mean whether it's
Really?
in school or out of school. Now, you can send a student from your class to the office, but you can't, as a teacher in the classroom, exclude a student from your class. That has to be done by an administrator. So that should not be happening.
We'll talk, because that is happening.
Now, we have a challenge within ISS, which is one of the reasons to look at eliminating that. You're sending them to a person who is not certified in most cases. They're simply there to monitor them. It creates additional work for a teacher to send assignments for that student into ISS. So it doesn't benefit the student greatly, and it's an increased burden on the teacher. It's better to have, again, if you go back to after school or Saturday, they can work on the homework they had from the class that they had that day, and they need to be doing things with whoever's running that to help them make better decisions. And you can put together some, for lack of a better term, some packages that help students to, look, here's what you did and you shouldn't have done it, and here's how you might think about it in the future. Somebody besides that monitor can prepare that, and they simply can deliver it. But ISS, again, has a lot of people like it. They like it because it separates students out that are being disruptive. If they're that disruptive, they may need to just go home.
True.
But for minor infractions, they need to be giving up their time, not the teacher's time, nor their instructional time.
So are we gonna look into revising that?
We're looking at
policy for
that throughout the rest of this year. And we're also looking and considering, it's really more applicable at the high school than the middle school level, a model where we might replace an assistant principal with 3, because of the cost involved, with 3 lesser qualified people, i.e. not administratively qualified, to walk the halls, to monitor many of the things that we're talking about being monitored here. Some models that have been successfully used in other places.
Mm-hmm.
What we found in Dr. McCrary's study of assistant principals, Jason, they're spending 30% of their time in supervision. Am I recalling that number correctly? High school APs. But the threshold was 30, but you had some of them at 50%. So if you take one position, now imagine you got them doing 30 to 50% apiece. You take one position and you can multiply that and have 3 people, because supervision is simply standing there watching, intervening if you need to, referring them on if somebody needs to go see an assistant principal. So we're looking at where we might put that into place as a pilot next year. Where it's not removing some assistant principal from their job,
Right.
but either taking a vacant position or where we have a vacancy that we don't yet know yet, and trying that in maybe 2 schools to see how that would work. Being able to use then assistant principals to focus more on things that actually require somebody at the level of an assistant principal to do. That doesn't mean they wouldn't be doing discipline. They still have to do, to my point earlier, they're the only ones, or the principal, that can exclude a student from class.
Well, the unofficial name for assistant principal is the disciplinarian, right?
Right. And
They're the ones that do all of the discipline.
And
But-
one of them will still have to be the disciplinarian, or more of them in a larger school, but not routine matters. If you've been late 5 times, and that means you go to after school detention, train a person how to approach a kid about that. But you basically say, here's your after school detention. Here's when you need to be there because you've been late 5 times. Now, if you want to talk to somebody about that, then you can talk to the assistant principal. You're really just delivering the discipline. The discipline's already outlined in the discipline code. You've been late this many times, here's what happens. So we're looking at how we might make that process more efficient. I think I've mentioned to you all that Jason's department did a study of assistant principals by following a number of them. Was it 20 of them, Jason? 20 of them during the day last spring for a period of time, and again this fall for a period of time, to see how they're spending their time. And so out of that analysis, we've got some more questions that we want Jason's folks to further research and answer. But one of the things that came out of that when we discussed it was they're spending this much time doing supervision. We can increase the number of people doing supervision and decrease the amount of time that we're paying somebody the level of an assistant principal to do supervision.
Okay. Question about the dress code. When did we stop measuring from the knee, the length of the ID from the knee? Because I know that we have some girls and guys with long legs, short arms, or long arms and short legs. I'm just saying. some of these skirts, and I've seen it, I go into the schools all the time, whether the girls they come in with the skirts at the right length, but then they roll them up. And and how do we monitor that? Because I've seen it all the time, and also we can't do anything about the clothing that is provided. All of the clothing that's provided, like with the leggings, some of the pants, some of the jeggings and all of that, they are tight to the legs. So with the clothing that's provided, I've seen some guys with short shorts on now. So when did we stop measuring from the knee with the ID length and just with the fingertips?
We won't have done that till we implement this. Some schools already do it this way. Others use ID length. What we looked for was, one, what was the most practical way to do it and the quickest and easiest way. All right, you don't want employees putting an ID on them to measure it. So you want the kid to do it, so then they got to take the ID off it. So that's one aspect. We'll do this as quickly as we can to minimize the amount of time. Now, this may not seem right, and you can measure this at home on your own if you want to, or you can sit in here and do it. Almost everybody in the world, from here to here, is their height. From here to here.
Not yours.
Yes. Yes, mine included.
Yours too?
Yes, almost everybody. That's their height. It is almost always proportional from your shoulder to where your fingertips hit. It is almost proportionally the same for everyone.
Yeah, some people that have a short cord though.
Yeah, you can do all your own experiments on this. I'm just telling you that statistically this is accurate. So if it falls on your fingertips for almost everybody, that gives you the same distance from your fingertips to your knee as it does for no matter what height you are. And if you want some of them to stand up and demonstrate, I guess they can. It's the
I'm just saying, I know that they used to measure with the ID.
Some schools still do
and
that.
I'm seeing the shorts and the skirts go shorter and shorter.
Right.
Well, that's because many of our schools completely relax what they're doing, and this brings that back into line.
So we're going to be
measuring
consistent.
anything with anything.
Okay, so we're going to be consistent, and I wanted to ask, Inner High Council said with holes above the knees, not below the knees.
Above.
We didn't listen to everything they said. I mean, we listened to it, but we didn't do it.
They wanted above the knees.
Some of them didn't want to have any dress code. We weren't doing that either.
So we used to have, I thought we used to have a rule of against any tank tops, you had to have something over them. So they are able to wear tank tops without anything over them now?
If the strap is the width of an ID, this, which
Strap
way?
has to be the width,
That way.
the width of,
Right.
width of the ID.
Mine's on my coat back here.
Yeah.
So,
Not the length, but the width.
Yeah,
And again, this we kind of have taken some middle ground because you had some schools that were very strict, like the measuring from the knee with the ID length, and then some, their policy for shorts just said they had to cover undergarments and not expose any body part, and that left it up to whose interpretation of what's appropriate or not. So the fingertip length kind of fell in the middle, no pun intended, as kind of a middle ground for those policies or practices, I should say.
okay.
There was some give and take, a lot of give and take on both parts.
Just one more question. With the hoodies, with it being, cold right now, and you have some school-sponsored hoodies that the kids wear, are those allowed? Because I see that you're saying no hoodies.
No,
can't wear them on their heads.
Yeah, We might need to
Oh,
clarify
okay.
that. They can
So
wear
they
it,
can
but they
wear a
can't
hood,
pull
but
the
they
hood
can't wear
up.
it on it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And some schools didn't want them wearing them
just-
at all because they felt like they were a hazard. Like kids will walk down the hall, some
Yeah,
other
but
kids
if
will
it's
grab them by the
cold-
hoodie and pull them.
If it's cold.
Yeah, take it from me, a man who likes hoodies, because I have
Yeah.
nothing to cover my head. So I love a hoodie.
So they can wear the sweatshirts and the hoodies, they just can't put the hoods
Over
on
their
them.
heads, yeah.
That was just for clarification purpose. But
We
thank-
probably need to clarify that.
I need clarification
Or
about that. I need for you to stand up, Burke, and show me where you measure where your hands.
Well,
measure.
that's right there.
No, don't bend down. Stand straight up.
Well, I gotta look to make sure my fingertips are there. No, right here. Which amazingly is the length of my ID.
So you can wear some shorts then, Burke.
No, I can only wear to here. Where's that, Debbie? Right here. Right here.
Okay, that's it, Miss Doolin. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cochran.
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions to clarify a couple of things. This is, I think, back on slide 10, but for the tardies that are the first through the third tardies at the high school level.
At the high school?
I think you mentioned that the parents would be contacted. Is that through the automatic phone system as it used to be? Is that now on Backpack, or how exactly is that done?
Well, the parent contact should be done by the teacher for tardies. So they should be making parent contacts. And once it gets to the referral level to the administrators, then the administrators should make that contact.
Well, I think more directly to your question, we don't specify how the school could determine that. To your point, you can use that automated system to do it. You could send an email to do it. You want to make sure it's acknowledged by the parent, though. Or you could make an actual, phone call, but people rarely answer those anymore. We've not directed a particular method.
Thanks for that clarification. That helps. I know from having been a teacher at the high school level, and you have 80 students or whatever on any given day, that certainly would take a good bit of your planning time to maybe have to make 5 phone calls because somebody got their first tardy. So that helps.
But I don't think the intent was for them to engage that on the first one. I think that was by the third one. Am I interpreting that correctly, Dr. Ward?
Correct. That first one is pretty much a warning. By the second or third, they should be making parent contact.
I think it would be better to be more directive in that and not require it till the third one.
My second question, down at the bottom of that slide, where it says tardies could be reset after each quarter or semester. Now, is that just pertaining to classes that are only a quarter long, that they could be reset at the quarter?
Right. And some of the schools wanted some flexibility to reset after every quarter, even with semester-long courses. So preferably it'd be at the end of the semester at the high school, since they switch classes anyway with the block schedule.
Yeah, where we're trying to reach a higher level of consistency here, it just seems like if some schools are allowed to reset them at the quarter and some reset them at the semester, that's a huge difference in the sense that at one school, you could be in the middle of December, you could get your 4th tardy and you'd be getting the consequence. Detention or either after school or lunch, Saturday, whatever. But in another school, you could basically be on tardy 6 and you'd be fine. So do we have any thought in place to where we do want to tighten that up, or are we going to leave it at some schools? Possibly a kid goes on tardy number 4, and at another school, they might not go till tardy number 7.
I think to your point, Mr. Cochran, we need to change that. Semester is sufficient. That's too many times being late in a quarter. That's too many times being late in a quarter if it's a semester class. Typically what you would do if it's a semester class is you'd cut the number in half, the number of tardies that cause you to invoke a certain consequence. That's where you would adjust for that. So to me, it needs to be reset at the semester, and for a semester class, which are now at the high school level only a quarter of the year, this should be proportioned to 1 quarter rather than 1/2 of the year. We'll make those changes.
Thank you, that's all.
You, Ms. Middleton? Thank you. Just a couple things. As far as the ID goes, I think we have to remember that the whole purpose of the ID is for identification and safety. So if the ID is not going to be worn correctly, then there's no point in the ID. So if the ID is either not someone's true ID, like maybe another kid gave them their ID, or they wear it under their shirt, then there's no point in having an ID. So I just bring that up because it's to me, it's a big violation if they're wearing an ID and they have it in their pocket, or they have it somewhere else, or they give it to a friend, then that to me is a very big violation. It's not so much they don't have an ID, which they forgot it. Okay, sometimes I forget mine too, but to be wearing it properly, I think the school needs to really enforce that and actually tell the students and the teachers and the principals, this is what the ID is for. It's all for safety. If something were to happen in the school, then we have to know who the students are, where they are, and we have to make sure that that is really why they understand that's why it's there. And it's not okay to have an ID in your pocket, even though you might have it. So maybe a kid might say, well, I'm going to take it. I'm just going to throw it in my pocket because I don't want to wear it. And then, okay, you say something, or a principal or teacher says something, oh yeah, I got it. And then put it back in their pocket when you're not looking. That totally defeats the purpose of the ID. So I just want to bring that up. And also on the dress code specifications, I'm looking at slide number 16. I don't see anything here about low-cut tops for girls. Maybe that's tank tops, but I remember when I was teaching, that was something I saw a lot of.
Be low cut from the top.
That would not be okay, right?
No, but, all right, here's the issue that you get into with that. That will need to fall under your policy that has to do with things that might be distracting. You have to be awfully careful in how you enforce that and how you interpret it and who does the interpretation. Because that can create all kinds of issues, particularly for the employee who may be addressing that with the student. So it would fall not under but under your policy about what's the wording in it, Doug, has to do with things that could be distracting or.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's policy JCD.
Indecent, immodest.
Yeah, so clothing, hair should not be so extreme or inappropriate to the school setting as to disrupt the educational process. That's one line. Clothing shall not be distracting, revealing, or overly suggestive or disruptive.
That becomes purely a matter of judgment. And there is not a way really to write a specification about how you translate what you see into that judgment. That's going to fall on the administration in that school to address that on an individual basis. It would be nice to think that everything could have a very clear cut. If it is this, then this occurs, then this occurs. That is an area where we do not have the ability to set such a standard like fingertip length or width of an ID card. There's not a way to objectively measure that. It is very subjective, but someone at some point has to render that subjective decision.
It sounds like even from what you're saying, Doug, the way you just worded it, I don't have it in front of me, that the clothing is suggestive or inappropriate or whatever. I guess that would also be very discretionary as to whoever would say somebody is wearing something suggestive. I know it's a tough. I know it's tough. I'm just bringing it up.
It's a
that's
case
all.
by case analysis, and you know there is some, for whatever it's worth, some case law about dress code and the ability to restrict certain attire, and you know revealing clothes, and really what the key crux is it disrupt? Would it disrupt the educational environment? Has it disrupted, or is it foreseeable to disrupt the educational environment? That's sort of the big litmus test. You know, whether it's too revealing or something of that nature, it's going to cause a disruption, or it's reasonable to think that. So, you know, that's typically the litmus test.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to bring that up. And I also appreciate what you said about the ISS. I would love to see that done in a different way. It sounds now like it's somewhat like babysitting during the school day. I don't know all the details of ISS, but if you could go to after school, before school, on Saturdays, I think you would see a lot less people wanting to go to ISS. I don't know. I think that's a good way to go, to think about that. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think that concludes our questions, comments for this also. I think both the cell phone rule update and these disciplinary consistencies and new dress code rules, I think that all of this is great because it creates a baseline, and on the school level, they can choose to strengthen it, but they cannot choose to weaken it. So, it sounds great. Moving on to item 4.03, there is a request from Langston Charter Middle School to terminate its charter with Greenville County Schools. Dr. Royster, would you like to talk about this?
Just briefly, Ms. Doolan, we present to you today a recommendation based on a request from Langston Charter Middle School to separate their charter from the district. They desire to move to the Charter Institute at Erskine. They have long been affiliated with Greenville County Schools, and we have had an excellent relationship through the years. However, this benefits both the district and the charter school in a financial way. The way the state calculates payments directly to charter schools, if they are authorized through the charter district or a charter authorizer other than a regular school district, their funding formula is different from the one that's applied if they're authorized through a school district. So while I do not have Langston's numbers, they have done their own numbers. This benefits the school district to about $1.5 million if it were calculated this year. Now, their request is to go effective next year. So some of these numbers could change a little bit from one year to the next because they're based on the previous year's expenditures. Is that right, Robin? So this benefits them financially, benefits us financially, has nothing to do with our relationship with one another. They've certainly been an asset to the district during their period of time since their founding as a part of Greenville County Schools. I believe they feel like they have benefited through that connection with Greenville County Schools. But we certainly recommend to the board the approval of their request, and you have Mr. Wooten's formal letter to you. And I think it is still pending the formal approval of the Erskine Charter District, or have they formally approved it? They have approved. Okay. So I don't know if Dr. Ward has any further presentation. I think Mr. Wooten may want to say something, and you all will note, I believe, one familiar face there in the back of the room.
That's right. Yes.
It appears to me to be Bill Roach.
That's right. We have Mr. Wooten here present, and I believe he wanted to share a few things with you. He's the principal and director at Langston, and also we have members from the Charter Institute at Erskine here.
I appreciate you letting me address you today. Thank you for that. Just to be brief, I just wanted to thank you for the many years of service and support you guys provided. 18 years we've been in existence, and every time we reach out, every time, you guys are quick to respond with advice or expert help that we need. I just want to say thank you for that. If it weren't for the changing in the funding formula, I think we would still have a real good reason to stick around with Greenville County. So I just want to say thank you.
And thank you to you all, because you all have certainly been an excellent part of this school district during your time with us.
All right, for questions, Ms. Mosley?
I just have a statement. As the parent of 2 children who've come through Langston Charter Middle, I am a big fan. I sat on the board for a few years there, and I am kind of sad that our relationship's ending, just because I do believe it's been a positive thing in our area, and I don't live very far, so it was a great commute for me and everything. I really enjoyed that. So, Mr. Wooten, good. I wish you well personally. So, my kids benefited greatly from coming through there.
Ms. Mosley. Ms. Bush?
Yes, I would like to move to approve the termination of Langston Charter Middle School's charter with Greenville County Schools effective July the 1st, 2024, pending its full acceptance to the Charter Institute at Erskine.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations. That concludes the administration portion of this committee meeting. Ms. Bush.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the Building and Grounds. Mrs. Middleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first and only matter of business in this category today is 5.01, Facilities Project Report. This item is for information only. Dr. Royster, would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Just briefly, you have your facilities project report as noted. I do not think there is any significant change in it. You have in there some projects that have been completed. So I think that status update, for example, the roof at MT Anderson has been completed. Some of the auxiliary work there has not been completed. One item I would like to note, because I made mention of this yesterday when we spoke to County Council about the impact of growth. While not a part of this facilities report, 6 months ago, school construction was running about $328 a square foot. Today, school construction is running, based on our last estimates, $349 to $350 a square foot inside a 6-month window. As you all know, when we send you the facilities plan update every spring, we always include a multiplier based on the most current year's inflationary numbers, because their costs are always going to go up. So we put an escalator on every project we include. It is escalated far beyond the escalators we have placed into those projects. So one thing that you can expect early in the first part of the year will be the necessary revision of some facility project budgets to reflect that tremendous cost increase. You all approved one the other night. Part of it was driven by the fact that we hit more rock there than we expected, and then the septic issue. But a portion of that, which really that project came in, I guess, as things were starting up, but not yet to where the point they are now. But that's going to be true for about every project we have sitting out there. That this, when you imagine going from 328 to 350 in 6 months, that's a tremendous increase. So I just simply wanted to say that to sort of set the stage for later on this year what you're going to hear. Then Colonel Carlin answer any question you might have about projects pending, completed, or other issues.
Are there any questions? Okay, hearing no questions, that concludes this section, and I will turn it over to, meeting back to Madam Chair.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes our work for today. And so I will entertain a motion to adjourn in a couple of seconds. And so all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Lunch is outside in the hall. And just a reminder, we will need to be back here this evening before 5:30 because executive session starts at 5:30. We've got a little bit longer executive session this evening in order for us to be out at 7 o'clock. But I fully intend to break Mr. Saylor's record tonight of how, because it was a short day today with approvals, so our agenda will be short tonight. So come prepared. See y'all at 5:30.